By the 6th millennium BCE, as North Africa's vast deserts expanded under a drying climate, a narrow strip of fertile land along a single river began to shape one of history's most enduring civilizations, ancient Egypt. The origins of Egypt are inseparable from the geography of the Nile Valley. Stretching over 6,600 kilometers from the highlands of East Africa to the Mediterranean Sea, the Nile provided a continuous artery of life in an otherwise arid landscape. Archaeological and geological studies indicate that between 900 and 600 BCE, much of the Sahara transformed from grassland into desert. Formerly green savannas that supported nomadic hunter-gatherer groups dried out, forcing communities toward the floodplains of the Nile. These early settlers, small Neolithic groups from the Sahara and the Levant, discovered the unique predictability of the river's annual inundation, which deposited nutrient-rich silt across the valley floor. Excavations at Merimda Beni Salama in the western delta and El Omari near modern Cairo have revealed early agricultural villages dating to around 5000 BCE. Pottery fragments, domesticated barley and emmer wheat, and the foundations of simple mud-brick dwellings indicate a gradual transition from mobile foraging to settled farming. These settlements were not isolated. They formed a network of small communities bound together by the seasonal rhythm of the Nile. The river's flood, peaking between July and October, created a dependable agricultural cycle that structured Egypt's economy and worldview for millennia. This dependence on the river's order and predictability later found expression in the Egyptian concept of Ma'at, the cosmic balance that governed both the natural and political world. The Nile's geography also imposed a natural unity. Unlike Mesopotamia's multiple river systems, Egypt's environment was linear, a narrow corridor of green bordered by deserts to the east and west, and by the Mediterranean to the north. These natural barriers minimized external threats and fostered a shared ecological and cultural identity along the river's length. Archaeological remains from the Badarian culture, dating to roughly 4400 to 4000 BCE, provide the first evidence of widespread cultural continuity across Upper Egypt. Graves at Badari, Matmar, and Mastageta reveal careful burial arrangements, with grave goods including ivory figurines, bone combs, and finely made pottery. Such items suggest emerging social distinctions and the beginnings of a shared symbolic tradition that would characterize later Egyptian religion and art. The Badarian people practiced a mixed economy of agriculture and herding, supplemented by fishing and hunting along the Nile's banks. The abundance of Nile clay fostered early pottery industries, while desert trade routes allowed the exchange of valuable resources such as carnelian, obsidian, and copper from the eastern desert and Sinai. These networks encouraged not only trade but also cultural exchange, creating the economic and social foundations that would sustain the first centralized state. Over time, the relative stability of life along the Nile encouraged population growth and competition among neighboring communities, leading to the formation of more complex regional societies. By the 4th millennium BCE, Egypt had entered the pre-dynastic period, defined by the emergence of distinct regional cultures along the river, the Naqada culture in Upper Egypt and the Madibuto culture in Lower Egypt. Archaeologists have identified strong differences in pottery styles, burial customs, and material culture between the two regions. In the south, the Naqada culture, centered around sites such as Hierakonpolis, Abydos, and Naqada itself, exhibited increasingly elaborate tombs, suggesting the rise of powerful elites. Painted pottery and decorated stone palettes from this period depict animals, boats, and ritual scenes that anticipate the formal iconography of the pharaonic state. At Hierakonpolis, known to the ancient Egyptians as Nekhen, archaeological excavations led by Michael Hoffman and Barbara Adams uncovered one of the earliest urban centers in Africa. The site includes evidence of specialized workshops for pottery, stone vessel production, and large-scale brewing, all signs of organized labor and centralized authority. Hierakonpolis also yielded a rich collection of ceremonial artifacts, including the scorpion macehead and the Narmer palette. These objects portray rulers engaged in ritual combat, smiting enemies, and performing religious ceremonies, imagery that symbolically linked kingship with divine order. The Narmer palette, dated to around 3100 BCE, depicts a ruler wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, an emblem of political unification that would define Egyptian kingship for the next 3 millennia. Control of the Nile's resources and agricultural surplus transformed social organization. Authority increasingly centered on individuals who could command labor, regulate irrigation, and direct the distribution of grain. Inscriptions and iconography from the late pre-dynastic period suggest that such leaders were viewed not merely as chieftains but as divine intermediaries, the first step toward the conception of the pharaoh as the earthly representative of the gods. Control of the Nile thus evolved from environmental adaptation to political dominion. The river also served as a natural highway, allowing the movement of goods, people, and ideas. Riverine transport linked the distant regions of Upper and Lower Egypt, creating a cultural and economic continuum. Imported materials from Nubia, the Eastern Desert, and the Levant have been found in pre-dynastic tombs and settlements. This trade brought exotic goods, gold, ivory, incense, lapis lazuli, and cedar, into the Nile Valley and introduced external influences that enriched Egyptian craftsmanship and religious expression. Yet the Nile's surrounding deserts acted as protective borders, limiting large-scale invasion and allowing internal development to proceed without interruption. Later inscriptions referred to this era as the time before the two lands were united, reflecting the Egyptians' own understanding of their pre-dynastic past as a formative age. Archaeological finds from Abydos, particularly in the royal cemetery at el-Quwaib, reveal early rulers such as Scorpion II and Narmer, figures who bridged the gap between regional chieftains and the first pharaohs. These tombs contain imported goods from distant regions and small ivory tags inscribed with early hieroglyphs, the earliest evidence of Egyptian writing. The inscriptions record quantities of goods, tax deliveries, and administrative symbols, showing that writing first emerged as a practical tool for managing the economy and state resources rather than as a medium for literature. This early use of writing for administration marks a critical stage in Egypt's development. The ability to record and control resources through written symbols allowed for the management of large-scale labor, taxation, and state projects. The systematization of record-keeping reinforced the authority of emerging rulers, linking bureaucracy directly to royal power. As administrative practices spread along the Nile, the foundations of an enduring state apparatus were laid, one capable of organizing construction, trade, and agriculture on a scale unseen elsewhere in the ancient world. By around 3100 BCE, the unification of Egypt under Narmer, remembered in later tradition as Menes, marked the beginning of the early dynastic period. The capital was established at Memphis, strategically positioned at the junction between Upper and Lower Egypt, enabling effective control over both. This act of unification represented not only political consolidation but also ideological synthesis. The concept of the two lands became central to Egyptian state ideology, symbolizing balance between the fertile delta in the north and the arid highlands of the south. The pharaoh stood at the intersection of these forces, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the divine order, through governance, ritual, and law. Archaeological continuity between late Naqada and early dynastic material culture demonstrates that unification was a gradual, indigenous process rather than the result of foreign conquest. Administrative seal impressions and standardized weights show evidence of centralized record-keeping and taxation systems. Large royal tombs at Abydos belonging to early kings such as Aha, Jur, and Jet display the coordinated labor organization that would later make the Great Pyramid projects possible. These developments indicate a society already adept at mobilizing vast human and material resources through centralized control. The ecology of the Nile continued to underpin the entire structure of Egyptian civilization. Annual floods determined agricultural productivity, while the level of inundation directly influenced economic stability and political legitimacy. Later Nilometer inscriptions at Elephantine and other sites reveal how closely the state monitored flood levels to forecast harvests and organize taxation. A low inundation could bring famine, an abundant one, prosperity. The pharaoh's perceived ability to maintain favorable conditions through ritual observance reinforced his divine status and political authority. Over time, this interdependence between environment, governance, and religion produced an enduring equilibrium. Egypt's civilization arose not through military conquest or geographic expansion but through mastery of environmental order. The predictable rhythm of the Nile fostered long-term stability and a worldview grounded in continuity and balance. The king's duty was not to expand endlessly but to preserve harmony within the natural and cosmic cycles of life along the river. By the close of the pre-dynastic period, Egypt had transformed from a constellation of small Neolithic villages into one of the world's earliest unified territorial states. Its economy was rooted in agriculture, its society structured by hierarchy, and its religion defined by the sanctity of order. The principles that emerged during this formative period, divine kingship, bureaucratic administration, and dependence on the Nile, would define Egyptian civilization for the next 3,000 years. By the dawn of the 3rd millennium BCE, Egypt stood poised to enter a new era. The mechanisms of governance, religion, and architecture that would characterize the Old Kingdom were already in place. The unification of the Nile Valley had created both opportunity and responsibility. The need to administer vast territories, organize labor on an unprecedented scale, and translate divine kingship into enduring institutions. The age of the first dynasties was about to begin. By the dawn of the 3rd millennium BCE, Egypt was no longer a landscape of scattered villages. Along the narrow floodplain of the Nile, power had begun to consolidate under regional rulers who transformed local authority into territorial control. This process, gradual, complex, and deeply rooted in ecology, culminated in the unification of Egypt around 3100 BCE and the emergence of the first dynastic state in recorded history. The early political landscape of Egypt was shaped by the geography of the river itself. The Nile's linear course naturally divided the country into two distinct regions. Upper Egypt, stretching from the first cataract at Aswan to the southern apex of the delta, and Lower Egypt, comprising the broad, marshy delta opening into the Mediterranean. Each region developed distinct cultural traditions and centers of power. Archaeological evidence from the pre-dynastic period shows that Upper Egypt, with its narrower valley and more limited arable land, fostered tighter social organization and stronger leadership, while the delta's openness encouraged dispersed, independent communities. Over time, competition between these regions produced a dynamic that would drive Egypt's unification. By the late 4th millennium BCE, the Naqada III period, circa 3200 to 3000 BCE, had witnessed the emergence of powerful proto-kingdoms in Upper Egypt. The most prominent centers were Hierakonpolis, Nekhen, Abydos, and Naqada, each serving as administrative and religious hubs. Excavations at Hierakonpolis reveal substantial mud-brick structures interpreted as palaces or administrative halls, storage facilities for grain and goods, and industrial workshops for pottery, textiles, and stone vessels. These features indicate the presence of organized labor and centralized authority. The concentration of wealth and monumental architecture suggests the rise of ruling elites capable of commanding significant human and material resources. Burial practices from this period also illustrate social differentiation. The elite graves at Abydos and Naqada display multiple chambers, imported luxury goods, and sacrificial burials of retainers, an early manifestation of the ideology of divine rulership. Hierakonpolis, in particular, yielded the so-called elite cemetery $6 where high-status individuals were buried with exotic materials such as elephant ivory, gold ornaments, and imported oils. The inclusion of animal burials, including lions and baboons, indicates the association of rulership with cosmic and natural symbolism, later formalized in the iconography of the pharaoh. These early rulers of Upper Egypt likely competed for dominance, using warfare, alliance, and religious patronage to extend their influence. Rock carvings in the eastern and western deserts, including the battlefield palette and Gebel Sheikh Suleiman relief, depict scenes of combat, conquest, and the smiting of enemies. Such images, among the earliest known representations of political violence, suggest that warfare played a significant role in territorial consolidation. Yet these conflicts were not purely military. they were ideological. The emerging concept of kingship linked victory with divine approval, framing political authority as a reflection of cosmic order. At the same time, Lower Egypt developed its own centers of power, notably at Madi and Buto. Archaeological remains from Madi reveal extensive trade connections with the southern Levant, indicated by imported pottery, copper tools, and bitumen. The presence of foreign goods suggests that Lower Egypt maintained strong external networks, contrasting with the more insular development of Upper Egypt. This difference in orientation, outward-facing delta versus inwardly unified south, created a structural tension between regions. Eventually, the more cohesive political organization of Upper Egypt allowed it to dominate and absorb the delta's wealth and strategic position. The unification process likely unfolded over several generations rather than as a single event. The so-called Dynasty Zero, identified through archaeological evidence at Abydos and Hierakonpolis, includes rulers such as Scorpion II and Ka, whose tombs display increasing administrative sophistication. The Scorpion macehead, discovered at Hierakonpolis, portrays a ruler wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt and performing a ceremonial irrigation act, a symbolic assertion of royal control over fertility and the Nile itself. This image captures a fundamental principle of Egyptian kingship, the ruler as guarantor of agricultural abundance and cosmic stability. The transition from these early kings to the first unified monarchy is embodied in the figure of Narmer, often identified as the founder of the first dynasty. The Narmer palette, discovered in the main deposit at Hierakonpolis, provides one of the most iconic images in early Egyptian art. On one side, Narmer wears the white crown of Upper Egypt, striking down an enemy. On the reverse, he dons the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolizing his dominion over both regions. Between the two scenes lies the intertwined necks of serpopards, mythical creatures representing the unity of opposites. The accompanying hieroglyphs display the earliest known form of the king's name, written beside a catfish, Nar, and a chisel, Mer, confirming the emergence of a royal titulary system that would persist throughout pharaonic history. The Narmer palette is not merely an artifact of conquest. It is a political statement. Its imagery formalizes the ideology of kingship, presenting the ruler as the embodiment of cosmic balance, enforcing order, Mat, through dominion over chaos, Isfet. The consistent association of kingship with divine sanction, particularly through the falcon god Horus, signals the fusion of religion and governance that would define Egyptian civilization. Narmer's victory scenes are mirrored in later royal reliefs, establishing a visual and symbolic language that linked every subsequent pharaoh to the foundational act of unification. The administrative reorganization that followed unification transformed Egypt from a collection of regional polities into a cohesive state. The capital was likely established at Memphis, strategically located at the interface between Upper and Lower Egypt. This site, near modern MIT Rahina, provided access to both the Delta and the Upper Nile, facilitating communication and control. Excavations in the Memphite region have uncovered early dynastic tombs, workshops, and seal impressions bearing royal names, confirming its central role in early state formation. From Memphis, the early pharaohs could coordinate agricultural production, taxation, and religious administration across the two lands. The bureaucratic structure of the new state was both pragmatic and symbolic. Administrative tags from Abydos and Saqqara record deliveries of grain, oil, and textiles, indicating the existence of a centralized system for resource management. Officials known as overseers of fields, scribes, and stewards appear in early inscriptions, reflecting an emerging hierarchy of civil administration. Writing, initially developed for economic purposes, became a tool of royal control, a means to document tax and command. Seal impressions bearing the Serek, an early royal emblem enclosing the king's name beneath the falcon of Horus, formalized royal authority in material culture. Religious institutions also played a critical role in legitimizing the new monarchy. Temples dedicated to Horus at Hierakonpolis and to Neith at Sais continued to function as regional cult centers but now operated under royal oversight. The pharaoh assumed the role of chief priest, performing rituals that sustained the gods and maintained the balance of the cosmos. This integration of political and religious authority provided a framework of stability that endured throughout Egyptian history. The king was not a distant ruler but a divine participant in the eternal cycle of order and renewal, a mediator between gods and humans. Archaeological evidence from early royal tombs at Abydos, El-Quaib, provides valuable insight into the structure of the first dynasty state. The tombs of kings such as Aha, Jur, and Jet consist of large, multi-chambered complexes with subsidiary burials, often interpreted as the graves of courtiers and servants sacrificed to accompany the king into the afterlife. The scale and organization of these tombs reflect centralized planning and a labor force directed by state authority. Grave goods include pottery, jewelry, and imported materials, underscoring Egypt's extensive trade networks with Nubia, the Levant, and possibly even Mesopotamia. A striking feature of these early tombs is the use of inscribed ivory and wooden labels marking goods, officials, and administrative districts. These inscriptions demonstrate the precision of early Egyptian record-keeping and the standardization of hieroglyphic script. The administrative sophistication implied by such labeling reveals that the early state was not a loose confederation but a tightly organized system capable of managing large-scale logistics. The early dynastic kings established a precedent for bureaucratic efficiency that would later enable monumental construction and complex taxation systems during the Old Kingdom. The consolidation of Egypt under a single monarchy also necessitated the integration of diverse local traditions. Regional deities, symbols, and rituals were incorporated into a unified religious system. The dual crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, the white and red crowns, became a central emblem of royal authority, later combined into the double crown, Skent, representing the unity of the two lands. The concept of duality permeated all aspects of Egyptian thought. Upper and lower, life and death, order and chaos, gods and men. This ideological balance mirrored the environmental duality of the Nile itself, fertile valley and encircling desert. The economic foundation of the unified state rested on agriculture, administered through royal estates and temple holdings. The government coordinated irrigation works, stored surplus grain, and redistributed resources through a system of state granaries. The annual Nile flood provided both the rhythm and measure of economic life. Scribes recorded the height of the inundation, predicting yields and determining tax assessments. This connection between natural cycles and administrative control reinforced the perception that the pharaoh, as divine ruler, ensured prosperity through his maintenance of Ma'at. Trade and diplomacy extended Egypt's influence beyond its borders. Artifacts from early dynastic contexts show contact with Nubia to the south, from which Egypt imported gold, ivory, and exotic animals, and with the Levant, from which it acquired timber, resins, and copper. These early connections established Egypt's position within the wider Afro-Asian trade network. Control of such routes not only enriched the royal treasury but also reinforced the ideology of universal kingship, with the pharaoh as master of both domestic order and foreign tribute. By the end of the First Dynasty, around 2890 BCE, Egypt had achieved a level of political stability and administrative coherence unmatched in the ancient world. The unification of the Nile Valley created a state that could command vast labor forces, maintain a consistent ideology, and sustain a centralized economy over centuries. The early kings established institutions, bureaucracy, priesthood, taxation, and royal cult that would endure, largely unchanged, for millennia. Yet the consolidation of power also introduced new challenges. The maintenance of order across hundreds of kilometers required an ever-expanding administrative class and communication system. The dependence on the Nile's floods made the state vulnerable to climatic fluctuations. Balancing the authority of the king with the autonomy of regional elites demanded constant oversight. These pressures would soon lead Egypt toward greater centralization and monumental expression of power, developments that characterized the Old Kingdom. By the close of the early dynastic period, Egypt stood fully unified, governed by divine kingship and structured by an efficient bureaucracy. Its cultural symbols, hieroglyphs, crowns, temples, and tombs, had already assumed their enduring forms. The foundations were now in place for the flowering of pharaonic civilization. By 2686 BCE, a new era began. The kings of the Third Dynasty, building upon the achievements of their predecessors, transformed Egypt into an empire of stone. Monumental architecture became the ultimate expression of divine authority, and the first pyramid rose above the desert at Saqqara, a testament to the unity of state, faith, and enduring order that had begun centuries earlier along the banks of the Nile. Distinct regional identities along the Nile began to coalesce into political traditions. During the late pre-dynastic era, roughly between 4000 and 3100 BCE, Egypt was not yet a single nation but a mosaic of local cultures, each developing its own material traditions, social hierarchies, and trade networks. This period, encompassing the Naqada 1-3 sequence in Upper Egypt and the Median culture in Lower Egypt, laid the cultural and economic groundwork for unification. Archaeological research defines the Naqada culture as the principal sequence of pre-dynastic development in Upper Egypt, named after the site near modern Cana. The Naqada sequence is divided into three main phases: Naqada I, Amratian, Naqada II, Gurzian, and Naqada III, Proto-dynastic, representing continuous cultural evolution rather than discrete replacements. Meanwhile, in the north, the Madibuto culture emerged as the characteristic Lower Egyptian tradition. During Naqada I, circa 4000 to 3600 BCE, Upper Egypt consisted of small agrarian communities supported by floodplain farming, animal husbandry, and fishing. Pottery from this phase, characterized by red-slipped wares decorated with white-painted geometric motifs, reflects localized craft specialization. Graves from cemeteries at El Amra, Naqada, and Hierakonpolis reveal modest social differentiation. Simple pit burials furnished with a few personal items such as combs, palettes, and beaded jewelry. The material record suggests extended kin-based settlements with cooperative economic organization rather than formal hierarchies. By contrast, Mahdi culture in the Delta and near Cairo shows distinctive northern traits. Sites like Mahdi and Wadi Digla display semi-subterranean houses, large storage pits, and evidence of trade with the southern Levant. Copper tools, imported bitumen, and Canaanite pottery attest to sustained contact across Sinai. Mahdi served as an intermediary hub connecting Egypt's interior with Western Asia, its inhabitants managing both agricultural production and exchange of foreign goods. These interactions introduced copper metallurgy and new technologies that gradually spread southward. The transition to Naqada II, circa 3600 to 3200 BCE, marks a decisive shift towards social stratification and regional integration. Settlements expanded, craft industries flourished, and elite burials became more elaborate. Cemeteries such as those at Naqada and Hierakonpolis contain graves with rich offerings, decorated pottery, stone vessels, ivory figurines, and cosmetic palettes shaped as animals or geometric forms. The appearance of imported materials such as obsidian from Ethiopia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, likely via Mesopotamia, and cedar from Lebanon indicates the rise of long-distance exchange networks coordinated by emerging elites. This period witnessed the establishment of regional centers, notably Hierakonpolis, Nekhen, Abydos, This, and Naqada, which served as focal points of production and authority in Upper Egypt. Excavations at Hierakonpolis reveal large-scale breweries, industrial workshops, and storage facilities. The presence of specialized craft areas suggests organized labor and administrative oversight. Architecture of mud brick and post-reinforced walls marks an early stage in urban development. The growth of these centers was accompanied by changes in material culture that reflect ideological transformation. Painted pottery from Naqada II, adorned with boat motifs, standard bearers, and ritual scenes, conveys symbols of power and ritual authority. Boats became central elements of elite iconography, likely representing funerary journeys or displays of dominance along the Nile. The introduction of animal standards, symbolic poles topped with figures of falcons, canids, or bulls, anticipates the later use of royal emblems and nome standards in the dynastic period. The cosmetic palette, initially a utilitarian tool for grinding pigments, evolved into a ceremonial object, often deposited in elite graves. Examples such as the hunter's palette and the battlefield palette depict organized hunts and conflict scenes, providing early visual records of social hierarchy and political competition. These images, though still symbolic, foreshadow the later royal art of conquest and divine rulership. Trade networks during the late pre-dynastic period became increasingly extensive. The Nile served as a conduit connecting internal production zones with distant regions. From Nubia, Egypt imported gold, ivory, ebony, and incense. From Byblos and the Levant, it received cedar, oils, and copper. From the eastern deserts, it acquired flint, malachite, and turquoise. Archaeological finds from Naqada II sites, including imported pottery from Canaan and stone vessels in Mesopotamian styles, demonstrate Egypt's integration into a trans-regional system of exchange. These connections were not merely economic but cultural. Certain artistic motifs, such as the Master of Animals theme or boat processions, appear in both Egyptian and Mesopotamian contexts during the late 4th millennium BCE. While direct influence remains debated, these parallels indicate awareness of wider symbolic vocabularies. Yet Egyptian society adapted foreign elements to its own traditions, emphasizing continuity of local forms rather than imitation. By Naqada III, circa 3200 to 3100 BCE, the social and political landscape of Egypt was undergoing rapid transformation. Settlement hierarchies became more pronounced. Large centers controlled surrounding villages through tribute, labor, and ritual authority. Fortified enclosures and elite residences appear at Hierakonpolis and Abydos, signaling institutionalized leadership. The tomb Uj at Abydos, attributed to a ruler conventionally named Scorpion I, provides decisive evidence for the emergence of kingship. Tomb Uj consists of 12 chambers filled with imported goods, thousands of pottery jars, and inscribed ivory labels, the earliest known examples of Egyptian writing. The labels record quantities of commodities and administrative notations, implying a developed system of accounting and governance. The presence of seal impressions bearing royal emblems indicates the establishment of bureaucratic control over production and distribution. The iconography of Naqada III reflects an increasingly formalized ideology of rulership. Carved palettes, maceheads, and cylinder seals depict a single dominant figure, often wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, engaged in ritual acts of victory or offering. These images mark the conceptual birth of the pharaoh, a ruler who combined military authority, religious sanction, and cosmic responsibility. The unification imagery that later appears on the Narmer palette and other early dynastic monuments draws directly from this pre-dynastic visual tradition. In Lower Egypt, the Madibuto culture persisted into the early Naqada II period, but gradually declined as Upper Egyptian influence expanded northward. Material evidence from sites in the Delta reveals increasing adoption of southern pottery styles and burial customs, indicating cultural convergence. The process was not one of violent conquest but of economic and ideological assimilation. Upper Egypt's stronger social organization and symbolic system exerted growing appeal across the valley, unifying artistic language and religious expression. At Buto, the continuity of local traditions coexisted with southern elements, creating a hybrid culture that bridged the two regions. Excavations have uncovered ceremonial objects bearing motifs of both traditions, suggesting active exchange and intermarriage between elites. This fusion laid the groundwork for later national integration, when rulers from Upper Egypt would claim authority over the entire Nile Valley. Religious thought during the pre-dynastic period became increasingly structured around fertility, death, and divine kingship. Figurines of female forms, often interpreted as fertility symbols, occur widely across Naqada sites, paralleling similar motifs in early agricultural societies. Animal imagery, particularly falcons, bulls, and canines, gained prominence as totems of strength and protection. The falcon, later associated with the god Horus, appears on standards and ceremonial objects as a symbol of sky and kingship. The bull, representing virility and power, features prominently in tomb scenes and ritual objects, prefiguring the royal epithet, mighty bull. Meanwhile, the recurring boat motif reflects both the physical reality of Nile transport and the spiritual concept of passage, between regions, between life and death, and between the human and divine realms. These symbols converged to form the ideological foundation of pharaonic religion. The ruler was envisioned as the guarantor of cosmic balance, linking agricultural cycles with divine order. The pre-dynastic elite thus not only consolidated economic power but also articulated a worldview that would persist throughout Egyptian civilization. By the close of the Naqada III period, Upper Egypt's dominant centers had begun to subsume neighboring territories. Iconographic and textual evidence suggests the emergence of powerful leaders, notably King Scorpion II and Narmer, who extended control into the delta. The archaeological record shows continuity between late Naqada material and the earliest dynastic artifacts, indicating a smooth institutional transition rather than rupture. The unification of Egypt around 3100 BCE was the culmination of centuries of social, economic, and ideological evolution. The regional cultures that once characterized the Nile Valley had merged into a shared political and religious identity. The interplay between Upper and Lower Egypt, between local tradition and external contact, produced a civilization capable of sustaining centralized authority and monumental ambition. Distinct regional identities had given rise to the first enduring nation-state in human history, a state that would endure in recognizable form for over 3,000 years. With Narmer's victory, the two lands became one political body. Around 3100 BCE, the final consolidation of power under a single ruler transformed Egypt from a collection of regional cultures into a unified kingdom. Archaeological and textual evidence from Hierakonpolis, Abydos, and the Delta illustrates how centuries of gradual convergence culminated in political centralization. This unification was not merely the result of conquest but the product of administrative coordination, symbolic synthesis, and ideological invention. The principal artifact representing this event is the Narmer palette, discovered at Hierakonpolis in 1898. Carved from a single slab of greywack, it portrays the king wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt on one side and the red crown of Lower Egypt on the other. The scenes display Narmer smiting an enemy and leading a ceremonial procession, accompanied by standard-bearers and divine emblems. Scholars interpret the imagery as both political record and ritual expression, the subjugation of rival polities, and the establishment of cosmic order. The intertwined necks of two mythical beasts on the reverse, often described as serpopards, symbolize the binding of North and South, the first visual expression of Egypt as a unified entity. At Abydos, tombs attributed to Narmer and his immediate predecessors, including Scorpion II, reveal administrative sophistication. Seal impressions record official titles and regional oversight, while imported goods from Palestine and Nubia attest to organized trade under central authority. Tomb architecture at this stage shows increasing complexity. Multiple chambers arranged in planned layouts with subsidiary burials for retainers. Such features mark the institutionalization of royal power. The king had become more than a tribal chieftain. He was a divine intermediary governing through a bureaucratic apparatus. The emergence of writing is inseparable from this transformation. The earliest hieroglyphic inscriptions appear on labels and seals from Naqada III contexts, primarily recording commodities, royal names, and administrative activities. By Narmer's reign, writing was standardized enough to encode political identity. His serek, the royal name frame surmounted by a falcon, proclaimed sovereignty under the protection of Horus. The association between writing, kingship, and divine order became a defining feature of Egyptian civilization. Archaeological evidence suggests that the process of unification unfolded gradually, extending over multiple reigns. Upper Egyptian rulers expanded northward through diplomacy, marriage alliances, and ritual incorporation rather than continuous warfare. Sites in the Delta, such as Buto and Tel El Farka, reveal transitional material culture blending southern and northern traits. The archaeological record indicates continuity of occupation rather than destruction, implying that integration was as much ideological as military. The foundation of Memphis, situated strategically at the juncture of Upper and Lower Egypt, represents the administrative consequence of unification. Tradition attributes its creation to Narmer or his successor Aha. Positioned near the apex of the delta, Memphis served as a neutral center from which the king could supervise both regions. The city's location facilitated access to agricultural surplus, trade routes, and the construction materials of nearby quarries. Later texts describe it as the balance of the two lands, embodying the equilibrium essential to the Egyptian conception of order, or ma'at. The dual imagery that permeated Egyptian state symbolism emerged from this moment. The king was titled Lord of the Two Lands, wearing the double crown, skent, that combined the white and red crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. Deities were paired Horus and Seth, Nekhbet and Wadjet, representing the unity of contrasting forces. Administrative divisions mirrored this duality, maintaining separate traditions while subordinating them to the royal center. The synthesis of regional identities under a divine monarchy created a stable ideological framework that would endure for millennia. Interpretations of the unification vary among scholars. Some emphasize the role of military conquest led by southern elites. Others highlight economic integration and cultural assimilation. Radiocarbon data and ceramic typologies suggest that Upper Egyptian influence expanded steadily northward during Naqada III, establishing trade and political ties that facilitated eventual consolidation. Regardless of the precise mechanism, the archaeological pattern reveals a clear trajectory toward hierarchy and centralization. The ideological implications of unification were profound. In Egyptian thought, the act of joining the two lands was not only political but cosmic, the restoration of order over chaos. The king's authority was conceived as the embodiment of Ma'at, sustaining balance between the fertile valley and the surrounding deserts, between human society and divine will. Royal iconography from the earliest dynasties continually reenacted the act of unification through ceremony and ritual, ensuring that political control remained aligned with cosmic harmony. By the end of the first dynasty's formative stage, Egypt possessed the essential institutions of kingship: a centralized administration, a unified religious ideology, and a standardized system of writing. These developments allowed for efficient management of resources across hundreds of kilometers of riverine territory. The unification thus represents not a single event but the culmination of systemic evolution, a convergence of geography, economy, and belief that produced one of the world's earliest territorial states. As Memphis rose to prominence, its bureaucratic and ideological systems began to formalize. Administrative officials, record keepers, and provincial overseers extended royal control into every region. This new structure, rooted in the precedent of unification, would become the backbone of Egypt's first great era of stability and monumental ambition. By the early centuries of the Old Kingdom, Egypt's unity was no longer in question. The authority established by Narmer and his successors laid the foundations for a civilization defined by permanence, a kingdom where divine kingship, bureaucratic precision, and the rhythm of the Nile worked together to maintain order for generations to come. The next phase of Egypt's history would transform these early achievements into enduring institutions of state power. Administration became Egypt's new architecture. During the early dynastic period, spanning roughly from 3100 to 2686 BCE, Egypt transitioned from a recently unified kingdom into a structured state. The rulers of the first and second dynasties consolidated authority, codified administration, and institutionalized rituals of kingship. Archaeological discoveries from Abydos, Saqqara, and Helwan reveal how bureaucratic precision, religious ideology, and material organization formed the foundation for the Old Kingdom's later grandeur. The first dynasty, founded by Aha-Menes, continued the political and symbolic work begun under Narmer. Tombs attributed to Aha at Abydos, Amelkab, and Saqqara demonstrate a fully established royal administration. Seal impressions from these sites list officials, estates, and temple endowments, marking the earliest evidence of centralized record-keeping. The use of hieroglyphic labels on storage jars and inventory tags shows a developed system for managing royal property. These early inscriptions, often naming specific commodities or officials, illustrate how literacy was integrated into governance rather than confined to ritual. Successive rulers expanded administrative reach. Under King Jur, the royal court managed estates extending from the Delta to Nubia. Archaeological remains from Saqqara and Abydos indicate a growing reliance on specialized personnel, scribes, stewards, and overseers of granaries. The state collected agricultural surplus through taxation, converting local produce into a redistributive economy controlled by the palace. Hieroglyphic inscriptions from Jur's tomb reference offerings to deities and royal funerary cults, showing how economic and religious functions intertwined under the king's supervision. The royal tombs at Abydos, particularly those of Jur, Jet, and Den, exhibit increasing scale and complexity. Each consists of multiple chambers for storage, ritual, and burial, often accompanied by subsidiary graves for servants and courtiers. At Den's tomb, an elaborate staircase led to a central burial chamber lined with imported cedar wood, a clear sign of both technical advancement and long-distance trade. Stone vessels bearing royal names, ivory plaques, and inscribed labels from this period attest to a culture of ceremonial order, where every object reinforced hierarchy. Under King Den, administrative sophistication reached a new level. His reign produced the earliest known representation of the king wearing the double crown, signifying control over Upper and Lower Egypt. Artifacts such as the Den sandal label depict the monarch in ritualized acts of smiting enemies, emphasizing his dual role as conqueror and guarantor of order. Sealings from Den's reign record departments for taxation, provisioning, and religious endowment, suggesting a permanent bureaucratic structure. The precision of these records points to a state capable of maintaining continuous accounting and resource management. The Second Dynasty, beginning with Hotep-Sekhemwy, maintained continuity but also reveals tensions inherent in centralized rule. Names of some kings, such as Ninetjer and Peribsen, appear in contexts suggesting shifts in political balance or regional authority. The appearance of Peribsen's Serek topped not by the falcon of Horus but by the Seth animal marks a significant ideological departure. Scholars debate whether this change reflects regional division, theological reform, or administrative realignment. Regardless, it demonstrates the fluid negotiation between religious symbolism and political power that characterized early monarchy. The reign of Kheskemwy, the final ruler of the Second Dynasty, represents a decisive restoration of unity. His name, meaning the two powers appear, explicitly refers to reconciliation between the domains of Horus and Seth, a metaphor for the reunification of Egypt after internal conflict. Excavations at Hierakonpolis and Abydos have uncovered inscribed stone vessels, ceremonial statues, and building foundations associated with his reign. The Shunet el-Zebib enclosure at Abydos, a massive mud-brick structure over 120 meters long, stands as one of Egypt's earliest monumental constructions. Its scale and design prefigure the mortuary complexes of the Old Kingdom, translating political authority into durable architecture. Throughout the early dynastic period, the bureaucracy expanded in scope and specialization. Officials were appointed to oversee irrigation, labor organization, and temple management. Administrative centers developed at Memphis and other key locations, each governed by royal representatives. The increasing formality of official titles, such as overseer of the granaries, controller of the royal estate, and chief of the scribes, reflects a hierarchy designed to sustain efficient governance. The emergence of written records for taxation and logistics ensured continuity across reigns, embedding accountability within royal control. Religious ideology paralleled these developments. The king's mortuary cult became a permanent institution, supported by estates dedicated to providing offerings. Funerary rituals, attested in tomb inscriptions and grave goods, emphasized rebirth and divine transformation. The architectural layout of royal tombs and subsidiary graves symbolized the cosmic order maintained by the monarch. At Abydos, the alignment of tombs along a north-south axis reflected the solar cycle, linking royal renewal with celestial motion. The artistic canon of later dynasties began to take shape in this period. Relief carvings and ceremonial objects depicted figures in formal postures, scaled according to status and arranged in ordered registers. This artistic discipline, emphasizing symmetry and clarity, mirrored the bureaucratic precision of the state itself. Iconography was no longer merely decorative but instructional, reinforcing hierarchy and divine legitimacy. By the close of the Second Dynasty, Egypt possessed all the institutional features of a mature monarchy. Administrative departments, a professional class of scribes, and an integrated religious ideology supported the centralized authority of the pharaoh. The material record, from ceilings and inscriptions to monumental enclosures, confirms that governance had become both logistical and theological. The interplay between practical administration and sacred kingship would define the structure of Egyptian civilization for centuries. As Kheskhemwi's reign ended around 2686 BCE, Egypt stood ready for a new phase of development. The mechanisms of record-keeping, taxation, and ritual established during the early dynastic period provided the stable framework upon which monumental statecraft could emerge. The Old Kingdom would transform these foundations into the enduring symbols of Egypt's power: pyramids, temples, and a vision of divine order made permanent in stone. The king was not merely ruler, he was the guarantor of order itself. In early Egypt, political authority and cosmic balance were inseparable. The consolidation of the two lands required not only administrative power but theological justification. The institution of kingship developed as a sacred office linking the human and divine realms. Its legitimacy derived from the concept of Ma'at, the universal principle of order, truth, and balance. The pharaoh's duty was to preserve this equilibrium through governance, ritual, and moral conduct. From the earliest dynasties onward, the Egyptian state was therefore both a political system and a cosmic mechanism. The title King of Upper and Lower Egypt embodied this dual unity. Royal inscriptions presented the monarch as the earthly manifestation of the god Horus, the falcon deity of the sky and protector of kingship. Each pharaoh's name appeared in a serek, surmounted by the falcon of Horus, indicating divine endorsement. The ruler's person was not merely chosen by the gods but a living extension of their will. This conception established the foundation for Egyptian theology. The pharaoh maintained Ma'at through his actions, rituals, and decrees, while rebellion or disorder represented the intrusion of Isfet or chaos. The early royal titulary reveals the complexity of this ideology. The Horus name, enclosed within the serek, affirmed the king's divine aspect. Later titles, the Neti name, He of the Two Ladies, and the Golden Horus name, expressed universal dominion and divine protection. The praenomen and nomen, enclosed within cartouches, formalized the bond between king and cosmos. Together, these five names constituted a sacred identity that transcended mortality. The king was both man and god, his body mortal but his office eternal, passing from one reign to the next in unbroken continuity. Material symbols reinforced this theology. The white crown, Hedjet of Upper Egypt, and the red crown, Dishret, of Lower Egypt signified dominion over both lands. Their fusion in the double crown, Skent, expressed unified rule. The crook and flail, carried in royal iconography from the early dynasties onward, symbolized shepherding and discipline, the ruler's responsibility to guide and protect his people. The false beard and uraeus serpent represented divine authority and vigilance. These emblems were not decorative but doctrinal, visible assurances that the king's power derived from the gods and served to uphold cosmic stability. Temples and royal enclosures served as the spatial embodiments of this ideology. In early centers such as Abydos, Hierakonpolis, and Memphis, sacred architecture mirrored the structure of the cosmos. Ritual space was ordered along axes representing the movement of the sun and the flow of the Nile, aligning divine and earthly realms. The king performed ceremonies that renewed Ma'at each day, offerings, purification rites, and symbolic victories over chaos. The temple thus functioned as both religious institution and administrative node, coordinating resources and labor for divine service. The role of Ma'at extended beyond theology into the operation of the state. In inscriptions and later wisdom texts, Ma'at governed legal judgment, social ethics, and economic fairness. Officials were expected to act in accordance with Ma'at, meaning with impartiality and precision. The pharaoh's decrees were considered expressions of divine order. Law and religion were indistinguishable. This integration of morality and governance created an enduring administrative philosophy. Hierarchy was not arbitrary but cosmically ordained, and obedience maintained harmony between humans and gods. Ceremonial art and architecture communicated this ideology to the population. The reliefs carved on ceremonial palettes, seal impressions, and early monuments displayed the king as conqueror of chaos, smiting foreign enemies, subduing wild beasts, or offering to the gods. These scenes were not historical reportage but theological affirmations. Each act of domination reaffirmed cosmic balance. Through ritual and imagery, kingship became a continuous recreation of order, a performance repeated across centuries to ensure the world's stability. This sacred kingship demanded ritual precision. Festivals marking the renewal of royal power, such as the said festival, originated in these early dynastic contexts. Archaeological traces at Abydos and Hierakonpolis suggest periodic rituals of rejuvenation in which the king demonstrated vitality before the gods and people. These rites symbolized the cyclical restoration of Ma'at, the renewal of the universe through the endurance of legitimate rule. The integration of ideology and governance transformed Egypt into a theocratic state. Every act of administration, from collecting taxes to recording harvests, was embedded within a sacred framework. Bureaucratic roles mirrored divine order. Scribes preserved knowledge as Thoth did. Priests enacted purity as the gods commanded. Officials maintained boundaries as Horus maintained the horizon. The state thus became a reflection of the cosmos, ordered, hierarchical, and perpetual. By the close of the Second Dynasty, the theological and administrative principles of kingship were inseparable. The pharaoh was the axis around which divine and human realms revolved, the embodiment of harmony between heaven and earth. The ideology of the sacred state gave Egypt its exceptional continuity, allowing successive dynasties to inherit a structure that required neither justification nor reform, only the unbroken performance of Ma'at. With ideology and administration intertwined, the Old Kingdom could begin. For the first time, stone rose skyward in the service of eternity. When King Djoser ascended the throne around 2686 BCE, Egypt entered a new phase of architectural and administrative sophistication. The foundations of the Third Dynasty marked a transition from the experimental monuments of the early dynastic period to the formalized, state-sponsored construction programs of the Old Kingdom. At its center stood one of the most remarkable achievements in human history, the Step Pyramid of Saqqara, conceived by Djoser's architect and vizier Imhotep. It represented not merely an architectural innovation but the visible expression of a new ideology, that the king's divine essence could be preserved eternally through form, ritual, and stone. The Step Pyramid complex, built on the plateau west of Memphis, began as a traditional mastaba, the flat-roofed tomb common to early elites. Archaeological evidence indicates that Imhotep progressively expanded this structure into a series of 6 superimposed tiers, reaching a height of approximately 62 meters. This transformation introduced a new principle in Egyptian architecture, the use of stone on a monumental scale. Each limestone block was carefully cut, transported, and aligned, replacing mud brick and wood with a material associated with permanence. The Step Pyramid thus symbolized both technological mastery and theological permanence, a stairway between earth and heaven where the king's Ka, his vital spirit, could ascend to join the gods. Imhotep's design integrated architecture, theology, and administration into a coherent statement of royal ideology. The pyramid complex encompassed more than 15 hectares, surrounded by a massive enclosure wall with 13 false doors, a symbolic boundary separating the sacred from the mortal world. Within, a sequence of courtyards and chapels hosted ritual performances, including the Royal Sed Festival, celebrating rejuvenation and divine kingship. Beneath the pyramid, A labyrinth of corridors and chambers extended nearly 7 kilometers, decorated with blue faience tiles imitating the reed mats of the king's palace. The replication of domestic motifs in stone signified the transposition of earthly order into eternity. The palace of the living king transformed into a palace for the dead. The architectural logistics of the Step Pyramid project reveal an increasingly centralized state. Excavations at Saqqara and nearby Memphis suggest that a complex administrative network was required to organize quarrying, transport, and labor. Limestone was extracted from local quarries, while copper tools, wooden sledges, and ramps facilitated construction. Inscriptions on seal impressions mention officials such as overseer of the pyramid workers and chief of sculptors, indicating a hierarchical labor organization. The vizierate, with Imhotep likely serving as the prototype of this office, coordinated economic and bureaucratic systems that mobilized vast human and material resources. This administrative precision became the model for all later pyramid projects. The innovation of stone architecture also had profound religious significance. The permanence of limestone contrasted with the impermanence of human life, reflecting the Egyptian ideal of endurance through divine order. The step pyramid served as a physical manifestation of Ma'at, the cosmic stability upheld by the pharaoh. Its vertical ascent mirrored the solar trajectory across the sky, anticipating the heliocentric theology that would dominate the Fourth Dynasty. The pyramid's form, a staircase to the heavens, symbolized the king's transformation into an Akh, a transfigured spirit uniting with the sun god Ra. Imhotep's role extended beyond engineering. Later traditions revered him as a sage, physician, and high priest of Heliopolis, identifying him with the intellectual origins of Egyptian science. Though deified in later periods, contemporary evidence portrays him as the embodiment of royal service and technical mastery. His inscriptional titles, Chancellor of the King of Lower Egypt, First after the King of Upper Egypt, and High Priest of Heliopolis, illustrate the integration of spiritual and bureaucratic authority. Under Djoser, the state's intellectual elite began to formalize the institutions that would sustain the Pyramid Age: temple workshops, record-keeping systems, and specialized labor divisions. The step pyramid complex itself became a prototype for all subsequent royal necropolis. Its spatial organization, an axis-aligned north-south, monumental gateways, and walled precincts, established a blueprint for later mortuary architecture. The decorative motifs, such as recessed panels and symbolic niches, referenced archaic palace facades, preserving continuity with earlier traditions while adapting them to new materials. This fusion of innovation and inheritance exemplified the Egyptian tendency toward evolutionary rather than revolutionary development. Each dynasty refined the architectural and ideological precedents of its predecessors. The emergence of solar theology during Djoser's reign marked a significant intellectual shift. The association of the pharaoh with the sun god Ra, whose cult was centered at Heliopolis, began to merge with the older Horus ideology of kingship. This synthesis laid the foundation for the Fourth Dynasty's pyramid cults, in which the king was regarded as the son of Ra. In this theological framework, the step pyramid served as both tomb and temple, a mechanism through which the king could ascend to the heavens and perpetually accompany the solar cycle. The orientation of the pyramid's passages, aligned toward circumpolar stars and solar points, reflected an astronomical precision rooted in priestly observation. The administrative sophistication behind such undertakings demonstrates the rapid evolution of Egypt's early state apparatus. Tax collection, labor rotation, and resource management were coordinated through Memphis, the political and logistical hub of the Old Kingdom. The storage facilities, workshops, and bureaucratic offices uncovered near Saqqara suggest a permanent institutional infrastructure supporting royal projects. From these developments emerged the archetype of Egyptian governance, a centralized monarchy sustained by specialized administrators, skilled artisans, and a stable agrarian base. By the end of the Third Dynasty, the step pyramid complex had redefined the relationship between architecture, power, and belief. It demonstrated that the state could command thousands of laborers, control regional resources, and translate religious doctrine into monumental form. More than a tomb, it was a statement of systemic order, a visual embodiment of the Egyptian worldview in which kingship and eternity were indivisible. These experiments culminated in the true pyramids of Giza. The pen replaced the pyramid as Egypt's enduring monument. By the dawn of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt's identity had shifted from monumental stone to administrative order. The reunification under Mentuhotep II and consolidation under the 12th dynasty produced a mature bureaucracy, a systematized machinery of governance that sustained the kingdom's stability for nearly 2 centuries. In this age, the scribe emerged as the cornerstone of Egyptian civilization. His craft, writing, replaced monumental architecture as the principal means of expressing and preserving royal authority. The intellectual and administrative culture of the Middle Kingdom reflected an Egypt less concerned with eternal stone and more with durable ideas, record, regulation, and reflection. The 12th dynasty kings, especially Amenemhat I circa 1985 to 1955 BCE, and Senusret I, restructured the state into a precisely articulated hierarchy. The vizier stood at the summit of the bureaucracy, supervising taxation, justice, and temple administration. Beneath him operated departments of agriculture, granaries, and archives, each managed by scribes responsible for measuring fields, recording harvests, and maintaining supply chains. Archaeological finds from Lisht, Kahin, and El Lahan reveal a system of standardized documentation, papyri listing labor rosters, grain inventories, and legal decrees. Administrative seals found in provincial capitals attest to a network of control that extended from Memphis to Nubia. At the local level, the power of the nomarchs or provincial governors was carefully balanced against royal oversight. During the first intermediate period, these officials had ruled with near autonomy. The Middle Kingdom monarchs reduced this independence through a combination of appointment and inspection. Excavations at Beni Hassan and Meir show that local tomb inscriptions increasingly emphasized loyalty to the crown, suggesting a formalized code of service. The king remained the ultimate guarantor of Ma'at, but the machinery of the state now executed Ma'at through written record rather than divine performance. Governance became procedural, law codified by the pen. The ideology of this bureaucratic order found literary expression in texts such as the Instructions of Amenemhat, attributed to the murdered founder of the 12th dynasty. Framed as a father's counsel to his son, the text combines moral guidance with political realism. Trust no brother, know no friend, make no intimate companions. It reflects the growing awareness of human agency in a world once ruled by divine certainty. Royal authority remained sacred, yet now it required vigilance, not merely ritual legitimacy. The king's wisdom, preserved in written form, became a moral compass for officials. The didactic literature of the Middle Kingdom thus mirrored its administrative ethos. Self-discipline, loyalty, and knowledge were the true foundations of the state. The Tale of Sinuhe, one of Egypt's earliest narrative masterpieces, further illustrates this intellectual shift. Composed during the reign of Senusret I, it tells of a courtier who flees Egypt after the death of Amenemhat I and lives among Asiatic tribes before returning to die in his homeland. The narrative explores exile, loyalty, and identity, themes resonant in a society increasingly conscious of order versus chaos, Egypt versus the foreign. Sinuhe's eventual return and royal pardon reaffirm the supremacy of the Egyptian center. Civilization, embodied in the bureaucracy and the king, triumphs over the uncertainty of the desert. The story's measured tone and moral clarity exemplify the Middle Kingdom's literary sophistication, a reflection of the stable, educated class that produced and consumed such works. These texts, together with autobiographical stelae erected by officials, form a corpus through which historians reconstruct Middle Kingdom ideology. The stela of Entef, Wa, and numerous provincial administrators display formulaic inscriptions extolling service to the king, fairness in judgment, and generosity towards subordinates. They also document the spread of literacy beyond the royal court. The ability to compose and commission inscriptions had become a symbol of social status. Tombs and chapels were no longer reserved for kings and high priests but for administrators, scribes, and craftsmen, evidence of a more meritocratic, record-based culture. The rise of scribal schools reinforced this transformation. At Kahin, the workers' village established near Senusret II's pyramid, excavations have yielded fragments of school exercises, vocabulary lists, and model letters. The education of scribes included not only writing but mathematics, surveying, and law. Through these institutions, knowledge became institutionalized and transmissible, ensuring bureaucratic continuity across generations. The Egyptian script itself, particularly the hieratic cursive, evolved to accommodate efficiency in record-keeping. The act of writing, once ritual, had become routine, yet its prestige remained immense. In later wisdom texts, the scribe is praised as one who commands without the sword, whose words outlast monuments. The expansion of this literate bureaucracy required ideological reinforcement. The Middle Kingdom kings portrayed themselves not as distant gods but as shepherds of the people, embodying moral and administrative competence. Reliefs from Karnak and Abydos show the king in active governance, inspecting projects, rewarding officials, maintaining irrigation works. Royal decrees from Coptos and Abydos grant endowments to temples while emphasizing the king's role as upholder of Ma'at through law and economy. This rationalized kingship contrasted with the divine absolutism of the Old Kingdom. Legitimacy now derived from administrative justice and prosperity rather than sheer cosmic status. The Middle Kingdom literary corpus also introduced introspection into Egyptian thought. Texts such as The Dispute Between a Man and His Ba reflect philosophical awareness of suffering, injustice, and mortality. This intellectual depth paralleled the administrative precision of the age. Both sought to impose order upon uncertainty. Bureaucratic discipline and moral reflection formed two aspects of the same ideal, the mastery of life through structure and reason. Economically, the bureaucracy facilitated agricultural regulation and labor mobilization on an unprecedented scale. Canals and granaries were maintained through systematic oversight. Border fortresses in Lower Nubia protected trade routes and secured resources such as gold and livestock. The treasury and granary departments, attested in papyri from El Lahin, demonstrate a coordinated fiscal system capable of supporting military expeditions and temple construction. The written record replaced oral command as the medium of authority. The document, sealed and dated, became the law itself. By the late 12th dynasty, Egypt stood as a literate, centrally managed state sustained by ideology and ink. The tombs of scribes and officials, decorated with scenes of writing and accounting, symbolized a culture that equated permanence with record. The Middle Kingdom's bureaucratic rationality would influence all subsequent phases of Egyptian administration, from the Hyksos period to the New Kingdom. But prosperity also bred complacency and exposure to foreign pressures. When the floods waned, so too did the king's command. At the end of the Old Kingdom, around 2181 BCE, the intricate machinery that had sustained Egypt's centralized state began to unravel. The delicate equilibrium between royal authority, provincial administration, and the Nile's annual rhythms collapsed under environmental and political strain. The period that followed, known as the First Intermediate Period, revealed how deeply Egypt's unity depended on both geography and governance. As the inundations failed and resources dwindled, provincial leaders assumed the powers once reserved for kings. The monumental stillness of the Pyramid Age gave way to a fragmented, adaptive landscape ruled by nomarchs, whose authority rested not on divine mandate but local necessity. Archaeological and textual evidence point to a conjunction of environmental and administrative crises. Studies of Nilometer records and sediment cores suggest that the river's floods decreased significantly in the late 6th dynasty, disrupting the agricultural base on which the state depended. Without consistent inundation, crop yields fell, taxation declined, and the flow of goods to Memphis slowed. Royal inscriptions cease abruptly after the reign of Pepi II, whose exceptionally long rule, possibly over 60 years, left an aging administration unable to respond to ecological stress. The centralized system, efficient in times of abundance, proved brittle in scarcity. In this vacuum, local governors asserted autonomy. The nomes, Egypt's traditional administrative districts, became semi-independent principalities. Tomb inscriptions from Asiut, Akhmim, and Beni Hassan record rulers who maintained order, distributed grain, and organized local defense, often without reference to the king. The Coptos decrees, fragments of royal edicts found in Upper Egypt, illustrate this shift in power. They grant privileges and immunities to temple estates, effectively recognizing regional self-governance. These decrees suggest that royal authority survived mainly as a ritual memory, invoked but no longer enforced. Material culture mirrors this decentralization. Provincial tombs, once subordinate to royal necropolis, now display individualized styles, reflecting local resources and traditions. The emergence of regional artistic schools, such as the sculptural workshops of Asiut and Deir el-Jabrawi, indicates both autonomy and economic vitality outside Memphis. Yet this pluralism also fragmented Egypt's cultural identity. The notion of a single cosmic order under one ruler weakened, replaced by localized expressions of power sustained by kinship, trade, and temple wealth. The famine stela, though composed centuries later, preserves the memory of such hardship. It recounts a period when the Nile failed to flood and famine spread throughout the land, prompting appeals to Khnum, the god of the source of the Nile. While partially mythic, the text reflects collective memory of ecological catastrophe. Archaeological surveys in the Fayum and Upper Egypt show evidence of settlement contraction and decreased building activity, corroborating a demographic and economic downturn. In these conditions, the traditional flow of offerings to royal temples and mortuary cults declined, undermining the ideological foundations of kingship itself. The collapse of centralized authority also transformed the scribal and legal order. Without royal courts to mediate disputes, justice devolved to provincial councils and temple officials. Administrative papyri from Elephantine and Thebes record local arbitration and property transfers managed independently of Memphis. The once unified bureaucracy dissolved into parallel systems, each sustained by regional elites. This shift produced a new political vocabulary. Governors adopted royal epithets, erected their own stelae, and even performed funerary rituals once reserved for pharaohs. The aura of divinity once concentrated in the king now diffused across Egypt's fragmented landscape. Despite the apparent disintegration, the period was not purely one of decline. Local initiatives maintained vital aspects of civilization, irrigation management, craft production, and regional trade. The resilience of Egypt's agrarian structure ensured survival even amid political fragmentation. Some nomarchs, such as those of Heracleopolis Magna, sought to restore unity by asserting authority over neighboring nomes, giving rise to competing regional dynasties. These minor kingdoms preserved administrative practices inherited from the Old Kingdom, serving as custodians of order until conditions favored reunification. By the early 11th dynasty, around 2055 BCE, the Theban princes of Upper Egypt emerged as effective successors to the old kings, reasserting control first locally, then nationally. Their rise marked the end of the First Intermediate Period and the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, a return to centralization tempered by the lessons of collapse. Egypt's recovery would be founded not on divine absolutism but on pragmatic administration, born from a century of provincial endurance. Regional resilience in this vacuum set the stage for renewal. From Thebes came the restorer of the two lands. In the early 11th dynasty, amid the fractured political landscape left by the collapse of the Old Kingdom, Mentuhotep II emerged as the unifier of Egypt. Around 2055 BCE, his reign marked the transition from the disunity of the First Intermediate Period to the restored coherence of the Middle Kingdom. The Theban rulers, initially one among several regional powers, consolidated Upper Egypt and eventually subdued their northern rivals at Heracleopolis Magna, re-establishing a single monarchy. This reunification did more than restore political order. It revived the ideological foundations of kingship and redefined Egypt's self-conception after more than a century of fragmentation. The Theban ascendancy began with a lineage of local governors who controlled the southern nomes around modern Luxor. Archaeological evidence from tomb inscriptions and reliefs at El Tarif and Abydos suggests that the early Theban rulers combined military acumen with religious legitimacy. Mentuhotep II's titulary, Nebuchadnezzar, Lord of the Rudder of Re, proclaimed both solar association and divine sanction, aligning him with the ancient Heliopolitan theology while emphasizing Thebes as the new center of power. By invoking Ammonius, the hidden god of Thebes, and fusing his cult with that of Ra, the king established a theological synthesis that symbolized renewal, a hidden order rising from chaos, much as Thebes rose from provincial obscurity to imperial prominence. The process of reunification was gradual and often violent. Reliefs and inscriptions depict campaigns against northern rivals and rebellious nomes. One stela from Jebelin records the king's suppression of lower Egyptian forces and the execution of dissident governors. Yet the outcome was more than military victory. It was administrative reintegration. Mentuhotep II reorganized Egypt's hierarchy, reinstating a centralized bureaucracy that balanced royal oversight with local governance. The offices of vizier, treasurer, and chief steward regained their prominence, re-establishing the channels through which royal decrees could reach the provinces. The reimposition of taxation, record-keeping, and temple management restored the financial and ideological backbone of the state. The symbolic heart of this reunification lay in Deir el-Bahari, on the west bank of Thebes, where Mentuhotep II built his mortuary complex. Unlike the linear pyramid alignments of the Old Kingdom, this complex blended architecture and landscape into a single composition. Its terrace structure, rising from the valley floor toward the cliffs of western Thebes, mirrored the ascent of the sun and the cyclical renewal of life. The sanctuary at the rear, cut directly into the mountain, represented a union between human craftsmanship and natural form, a metaphor for restored harmony between the king and the cosmos. Excavations led by Edouard Neville and later Herbert Winlock have revealed chapels, colonnades, and painted reliefs depicting the reunification of Egypt and the king's divine status. The site stands as the first major architectural statement of the Middle Kingdom's ideological synthesis. The art and inscriptions of Mentuhotep's reign emphasize rebirth and continuity. The king is portrayed in both Upper Egyptian and Lower Egyptian crowns, signifying unity. Reliefs from his temple depict processions of deities, offering bearers, and soldiers, illustrating a revived vision of Ma'at, order restored through rightful kingship. The funerary cult established at Deir el-Bahari endured for centuries, influencing later royal projects, including that of Hatshepsut in the 18th dynasty, built on the same sacred axis. This continuity underscores the success of Mentuhotep's ideological restoration. Thebes was no longer a provincial stronghold, but the spiritual capital of Egypt. The cult of Ammonius Ra emerged from this period as the dominant theological force. Ammonius' qualities, invisibility, transcendence, and creative power, complemented Ra's visible solar strength. Their fusion represented both mystery and revelation, a cosmic balance that paralleled the political reunification of Upper and Lower Egypt. The growth of Ammonius' priesthood at Karnak signaled the integration of religion and statecraft. The king's building endowments in Thebes, including the earliest known temples to Ammonius, institutionalized this duality: the divine and the administrative, the hidden and the manifest. Reunification also revived Egypt's international posture. Military expeditions resumed into Nubia and the Sinai Peninsula, reclaiming control over gold mines and trade routes. Rock inscriptions at Wadi Hammamat and Elephantine document the dispatch of organized workforces, demonstrating the restoration of royal authority beyond the Nile Valley. The systematic recording of these ventures reflects an administrative confidence absent for generations. The return of order permitted the collection of surplus wealth, the sponsorship of temple projects, and the re-establishment of long-distance exchange networks with Byblos and Punt. Inscriptions and tomb reliefs from Mentuhotep's officials convey pride in service and stability. Titles such as Overseer of Fields, Controller of the Granary, and Chief Scribe of Recruits reappear, signaling the normalization of bureaucratic hierarchies. The tone of these inscriptions contrasts sharply with the provincial independence of the preceding era. Where earlier nomarchs proclaimed their autonomy, now officials profess devotion to the throne and the restoration of Ma'at. This ideological realignment, rooted in the experience of past disorder, became a central tenet of Middle Kingdom political thought. The prosperity of the land depended on the unity of governance. Mentuhotep II's final years were marked by the consolidation of Theban supremacy across Egypt. His successors, Mentuhotep III and Mentuhotep IV, maintained the structures he had created, extending royal influence and developing the administrative foundation that the 12th dynasty would inherit. The king's mortuary cult endured long after his death, his image venerated as the restorer of divine order. Through architecture, religion, and law, the Theban monarch had redefined what it meant to be pharaoh. Not simply a divine figure but a restorer of balance, a human agent of cosmic renewal. Peace permitted an unprecedented refinement of administration and thought. Writing became Egypt's conscience. In the orderly calm of the 12th dynasty, a new Egypt took shape, not through conquest or stone, but through ink. Bureaucracy became art, writing, an act of devotion. The officials and scribes who once served as instruments of royal decree now became the architects of memory and morality. Their pens defined what it meant to live rightly, to rule justly, and to endure in the eyes of eternity. This was the age when Egypt discovered its voice, rational, moral, introspective, and inscribed it on papyrus, stele, and the walls of tombs. At the heart of this transformation was the scribal class. The vizier or chedi stood at the apex of administration, second only to the king. Below him stretched a hierarchy of treasurers, recorders, stewards, and tax officials who governed Egypt's nomes with precision. The centralization initiated under Amenemhat I and perfected by Senusret III transformed the kingdom into a finely tuned machine of order. Papyrus accounts from Lahin and Illahun, the pyramid town built for Senusret II, reveal a complex bureaucracy of land registries, grain quotas, and labor schedules, all maintained by legions of trained scribes. To write was to wield power. Literacy became the symbol of civilization itself. The ideology of writing permeated daily life. The Satire of the Trades, a popular scribal text, celebrates the scribe as superior to every other profession. There is no job without a boss except the scribe. He is the boss. But this wasn't arrogance. It reflected a moral philosophy. Writing was seen as an act of creation, a parallel to the divine speech of Thoth, the god of wisdom. To record the world was to preserve it against decay. Bureaucracy thus became a spiritual discipline, an exercise in maintaining Ma'at, the eternal order that bound gods and men alike. Nowhere is this worldview more vividly expressed than in the literature of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt's first great age of self-conscious writing. Works like the Instruction of Amenemhat and the Tale of Sinuhe mark a new intimacy between power and reflection. The Instruction, attributed to Amenemhat I and addressed to his son Senusret I, fuses political wisdom with personal warning. Trust not a brother, no, not a friend. The Ghost King cautions, recounting his assassination. Beneath its pragmatic tone lies a meditation on mortality and the fragility of kingship. The king's words transcend their immediate context, offering a philosophy of vigilance. Even divine rulers must guard against chaos. The tale of Sinuhe deepens this moral landscape. The story follows an official who flees Egypt after the king's death, living in exile among Asiatic tribes before returning, repentant, to die at home. Written in lyrical prose, it reflects the Egyptian ideal of balance, order versus wilderness, belonging versus alienation. Sinuhe's journey is not merely geographical. It is moral. His exile among foreigners mirrors Egypt's fear of disorder. His longing for home an allegory of the soul's yearning for Ma'at. When he is finally pardoned and buried in a tomb befitting his station, the tale closes the circle. Chaos is overcome by mercy, and the pen restores what the sword could not. Autobiographical tomb inscriptions echo these themes of moral order. The officials of the Middle Kingdom inscribed not their conquests, but their virtues. I gave bread to the hungry, I clothed the naked, I ferried the boatless. These lines, carved into limestone and polished by desert winds, became Egypt's earliest moral epitaphs. The autobiography was less a record of fact than a ritual of justification, anticipating the judgment before Osiris. Through these texts, a bureaucratic ethos became an ethical one, the scribe and the official as moral agents upholding divine order in the human realm. The relationship between king and subject was also redefined. While the Old Kingdom exalted the pharaoh as a distant god, the Middle Kingdom portrayed him as a wise ruler in dialogue with his people. Stele from Abydos and Beni Hassan show officials addressing the king not as a living deity, but as a moral superior. This subtle humanization of kingship paralleled the introspective tone of the age. Power was now measured by wisdom and restraint rather than sheer monumentality. The state's ideology was moral before it was martial. Even architecture reflected bureaucratic rationality. The pyramid complexes of the 12th dynasty, smaller and more precise than their Old Kingdom predecessors, stood at the center of planned towns like Lahan and Hawera. These were not mere royal necropolis but hubs of administration and economy. The surrounding settlements, inhabited by scribes and craftsmen, reveal a society that had mastered the logistics of permanence. Order was no longer carved in stone but maintained through record, schedule, and decree. The art of the period mirrors the same ethical restraint. Statues of Senusret III, with their furrowed brows and stern realism, depart from the serene idealism of earlier kings. His face, marked by care and introspection, embodies the new moral tone, the ruler as guardian, not God. In reliefs and papyri, human emotion, sorrow, humility, resolve, finds expression alongside divine grandeur. It was an age that prized balance between intellect and faith, authority and conscience. Education, too, became institutionalized. Scribal schools proliferated, especially in temple precincts and pyramid towns. Students copied maxims, hymns, and royal decrees, preserving Egypt's literary canon while internalizing its moral code. The instructions of Tahotep and Instruction for Merakare, copied anew, taught the virtues of restraint, honesty, and compassion. In this system, literacy was not merely vocational. It was ethical training. A good scribe was a just man, and through him the world was kept in order. By the end of the 12th dynasty, Egypt had become a civilization of record, a culture that believed memory itself could sustain eternity. The Great Pyramids no longer defined immortality. The written word did. Through papyri and stone, the Egyptians of the Middle Kingdom achieved a kind of introspective permanence. Their literature became scripture, their bureaucracy a reflection of the divine order. Yet stability invited new challenges from beyond Egypt's borders. Foreign rulers brought new weapons and new ideas to the Nile. By the late 13th dynasty, the stable machinery of the Middle Kingdom had begun to fracture. A long succession of short-lived kings, ruling from Ichtoi and Thebes, weakened central authority. Egypt's borders, once firmly held by royal garrisons and nomarchal administration, became porous. In the eastern delta, where fertile lands merged with the trade routes of Canaan and Syria, waves of Asiatic settlers gradually established communities that blended Egyptian and Levantine cultures. Over time, this demographic shift would alter the balance of power in the north and introduce a new era of political fragmentation. Archaeological evidence from Tel El Dabeh, ancient Avaris, provides the clearest record of this transition. Excavations led by Manfred Byatak reveal a cosmopolitan settlement. Canaanite-style houses, pottery with Near Eastern motifs, and burial customs incorporating both Egyptian and Levantine traditions. The material record indicates that Asiatic populations had integrated peacefully at first, serving as merchants, artisans, and soldiers. Their presence, far from an invasion, represented a gradual infiltration that coincided with Egypt's weakening central control. These communities, however, eventually coalesced into a distinct ruling elite, the Hyksos, a term derived from Hika Kasut, meaning rulers of foreign lands. The rise of the Hyksos in the 15th dynasty transformed Egypt's political geography. While they controlled the delta from their capital at Avaris, native Egyptian dynasties persisted in Thebes and Abydos, maintaining nominal rule over Upper Egypt. The resulting division created a dual kingdom, the north governed by foreign rulers who adopted Egyptian titles and rituals, the south held by local kings who regarded themselves as the legitimate heirs of the pharaohs. Papyrus records, seal impressions, and stele from this period reflect this uneasy coexistence. Two Egypts sharing the same river but differing in sovereignty. Technological innovations accompanied this new regime. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests that the Hyksos introduced several military and material advancements. The horse-drawn chariot, composite bow, and improved bronze weaponry. These tools would later redefine Egyptian warfare. The chariot, in particular, represented a revolution in mobility and tactical power. Hyksos fortifications, characterized by earthen ramparts and bastioned walls, show parallels with Levantine designs, confirming the diffusion of Near Eastern military architecture. Far from being mere usurpers, the Hyksos brought with them practical knowledge that Egypt would eventually adapt and refine. Cultural exchange was equally significant. The Hyksos worshipped Baal and Astarte, deities associated with storm and fertility, but they readily equated Baal with the Egyptian Seth, god of chaos and foreign lands. This syncretism reinforced their legitimacy among northern populations while introducing new theological dimensions to Egyptian religion. Artifacts such as scarabs inscribed with both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Semitic names underscore this blending of traditions. Trade with the Levant, Cyprus, and possibly the Aegean flourished under their rule, evidenced by imported goods found at delta sites, ceramics, faience, and metal tools that connected Egypt to a wider Bronze Age economy. Despite this complexity, Egyptian sources of later periods portrayed the Hyksos as oppressors. The Rhind mathematical papyrus and the Kamos stele frame them as foreign intruders who desecrated temples and disrupted Ma'at. This narrative reflects Theban propaganda from the eventual War of Liberation, but the underlying resentment was real. Economic decline and restricted access to northern trade routes deepened Thebes' hostility. The once unified kingdom had become dependent on diplomacy with foreign rulers within its own land. By the 17th century BCE, Theban kings began to resist Hyksos dominance openly. The stele of Seqenenretau and Kamos recount early campaigns against avarice, presenting them as the first stirrings of national revival. Archaeological remains from Thebes reveal hastily constructed fortifications, suggesting that the conflict had become total. Kamos inscriptions describe his march northward, burning settlements and cutting off Hyksos supply lines. His death left the struggle unfinished, but his successor Ahmose I would continue it with greater force. The struggle against the Hyksos was not merely political, it was transformative. In confronting a technologically superior adversary, Egypt was compelled to modernize its army, reorganize its command structure, and embrace foreign innovations. When Ahmose finally captured Avaris around 1550 BCE, he unified the two lands once more, marking both the end of the Second Intermediate Period and the beginning of the New Kingdom. Their expulsion would transform Egypt into an imperial power. Liberation forged the foundations of empire. The victory of Ahmose I over the Hyksos around 1550 BCE marked a decisive turning point in Egyptian history. What began as a war of survival became the genesis of imperial ambition. The expulsion of the Hyksos from Avaris, confirmed by excavations at Tel el-Debe, signaled not only the restoration of unity but the birth of a new ideology: Egypt as a conquering power. The trauma of foreign occupation had reshaped Egyptian identity. From this point onward, security would no longer depend on walls or treaties, but on the projection of power far beyond the Nile. The military reforms undertaken during this campaign were unprecedented. Ahmose inherited an army already transformed by contact with the Hyksos, now equipped with horse-drawn chariots, composite bows, and bronze-tipped spears. These innovations were systematically incorporated into a professionalized military hierarchy. Tomb inscriptions from El-Kab, notably those of Ahmose son of Abana, provide a first-hand account of the campaigns. I fought bravely before His Majesty in the taking of Avaris. The text not only glorifies individual valor but also attests to the discipline and coordination of the new Egyptian army. Naval elements played a crucial role as well, with fleets deployed along the Nile and into the Mediterranean, signaling a sophistication unseen in earlier warfare. After securing the delta, Ahmose turned his attention southward to Nubia, re-establishing control over territories that had slipped away during the Second Intermediate Period. Fortresses such as Buhin and Sai Island, originally constructed in the Middle Kingdom, were restored and garrisoned. These campaigns had both strategic and economic motivations. Nubia's gold mines and trade routes were vital to Egypt's revival. Stele from Tombos and Semna record Ahmose victories and the imposition of Egyptian authority over local chiefs. In these records, conquest and administration were intertwined, military expansion framed as the restoration of divine order. The consolidation of power required more than victories abroad. It demanded stability at home. Ahmose embarked on extensive rebuilding at Thebes, commissioning temples to Ammonius that symbolized both divine gratitude and renewed central authority. The Temple of Karnak began to take on the monumental scale that would define it for centuries. Reliefs from the early 18th dynasty depict offerings to the gods as acts of cosmic restitution. Egypt had expelled chaos, and now order was to be re-established through ritual and architecture. The process of reconstruction extended into the bureaucratic and religious spheres. The office of the god's wife of Ammonius, held by royal women such as Ahmose Nefertari, was elevated to new prominence. This position combined spiritual and political influence, bridging the temple and the throne. Thebes, already the spiritual heart of Upper Egypt, became the center of national identity. The cult of Ammonius, god of creation and kingship, embodied the new state ideology. Egypt was divinely chosen to bring harmony to a disordered world. Successors built upon Ahmose's foundation. Amenhotep I continued campaigns into Nubia, extending Egypt's control as far as the Second Cataract. His reign also saw administrative refinements, the formalization of the viceroy of Kush, who governed the southern territories in the pharaoh's name. This system created a durable frontier structure, ensuring both resource extraction and the cultural integration of Nubia. Egyptian art and architecture flourished under his patronage. Temples at Deir el-Bahari and Karnak display an emerging imperial confidence. Amenhotep I's successor, Thutmose I, brought Egypt to new heights of expansion. In a series of campaigns recorded on stele at Tombos and Armina, he penetrated deep into Nubia and advanced northward into Syria-Palestine. For the first time, Egyptian armies crossed the Euphrates River, confronting the powers of Mitanni and other Near Eastern states. This was no longer defensive warfare, it was imperial assertion. Thutmose's inscriptions proudly proclaim that he set his boundary where the sun rises. The language reflects a new political horizon. Egypt as the center of a world order defined by its divine kingship. Archaeological finds from Avaris and Karnak confirm the material prosperity that accompanied this expansion. Palatial compounds, administrative archives, and imported goods attest to a thriving economy fueled by conquest. Tribute and plunder from Nubia and Canaan enriched the temples, reinforcing the reciprocal bond between religion and empire. The pharaoh's victories were celebrated in ritual festivals. Military triumphs became acts of divine renewal. This new ideology of empire required institutional coherence. Thutmose I reorganized provincial governance, ensuring that taxation, labor, and military service functioned in harmony. The expanded bureaucracy documented everything, from grain shipments to the allocation of temple estates. The vizierate, now divided between north and south, became the backbone of imperial administration. Inscriptions from Reckmeyer's tomb in later generations trace their origins to this model of dual governance, emphasizing efficiency and accountability. Culturally, the New Kingdom's opening decades saw a shift in how Egypt viewed itself in relation to the outside world. Earlier eras had regarded foreign lands as chaotic peripheries. Now they were zones of opportunity, places from which Egypt could extract wealth and demonstrate its divine mandate. The frontier was no longer a boundary, it was a theater of expansion. Artistic depictions of Nubians, Asiatics, and Libyans in temple reliefs reflect both ethnographic observation and the assertion of Egyptian dominance. By the time of Thutmose II, Egypt's authority stretched from the Fourth Cataract in Nubia to the borders of Syria. The achievements of Ahmose and his successors had transformed a fractured kingdom into a militarized state, economically stable and ideologically unified under Ammonius supremacy. The pharaoh was no longer simply a divine intermediary. He was commander, builder, and legislator, embodying a new synthesis of sacred and secular power. The victory over the Hyksos had taught Egypt a lasting lesson. Isolation invited weakness, and control required reach. Thus, from the ashes of foreign domination arose a civilization determined to project its order beyond its natural frontiers. Egypt now turned outward to dominate its neighbors. Egypt stood at the center of a world connected by tribute and correspondence. Under the reign of Thutmose III, circa 1479 to 1425 BCE, the new kingdom reached a level of military and political dominance unprecedented in Egyptian history. Often called the Napoleon of Egypt, Thutmose III transformed the kingdom into a regional superpower, projecting authority across the Levant, Syria, and into the Nubian corridor. His campaigns, meticulously recorded on the walls of the Karnak temple, demonstrate not only tactical ingenuity but also a sophisticated system of administration designed to integrate conquered territories into Egypt's imperial framework. The king's army, organized into divisions supported by chariots, infantry, and Nubian auxiliaries, executed rapid movements along diverse terrains, from the deserts of Sinai to the mountains of Lebanon. Thutmose III's first campaign, following the brief co-regency with Hatshepsut, confronted a coalition of Canaanite city-states at Megiddo. This battle, reconstructed through inscriptions and reliefs, reveals meticulous planning. Egyptian forces blocked escape routes, deployed chariots to outflank opponents, and coordinated logistics to sustain a protracted siege. Victories at Megiddo, Tanakh, and Kadesh were consolidated through the collection of tribute, which included silver, gold, livestock, timber, and exotic goods. These resources not only enriched the royal treasury but also funded monumental building projects in Thebes, including the expansion of Karnak and the construction of subsidiary temples in Nubia and the Delta. Beyond military conquest, Thutmose III established an early form of imperial governance. Provincial governors, often local elites co-opted into Egyptian administration, were responsible for taxation, resource management, and maintaining loyalty to the pharaoh. The integration of local traditions with Egyptian bureaucracy fostered stability, reducing the need for constant military presence. In Nubia, fortresses at Semna, Urinnardi, and Mergissa functioned as administrative hubs, ensuring that tribute flowed steadily to the center. Inscriptions on steely and fortified gateways emphasized that the king's authority extended from the Nile Valley to the edges of the Levant, legitimized through ritual, record, and the visible presence of Egyptian garrisons. Following Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, circa 1386 to 1353 BCE, shifted the focus from conquest to diplomacy and cultural consolidation. His reign epitomized the zenith of New Kingdom wealth and international prestige. Unlike his military-focused predecessor, Amenhotep III relied on alliances cemented through marriage, tribute, and correspondence. The Amarna letters, discovered at El Amarna, provide a remarkable window into these relationships. Written in Akkadian, the lingua franca of the Near East, the letters document exchanges with Babylon, Assyria, Mitanni, and Hutti, revealing a complex network of diplomacy. Pharaohs were addressed as equals, sharing gifts, arranging marriages, and negotiating territorial boundaries, illustrating Egypt's position not as an isolated kingdom but as a central player in a connected Bronze Age world. This period also witnessed an unprecedented surge in monumental architecture, reflecting both divine favor and imperial prosperity. Amenhotep III undertook extensive construction at Karnak, Luxor, and Medinet Habu, expanding temple precincts and erecting colossal statues, including the famous colossi of Memnon. These projects were not mere displays of wealth. They functioned as centers of ritual, administration, and ideology. Temples served as hubs of economic activity, employing thousands of workers, scribes, and priests. Endowments from tribute and taxation funded religious ceremonies, sustaining the perception that Egyptian dominance was sanctioned by the gods. The integration of conquered territories into a cohesive imperial system relied on a combination of symbolic and practical measures. In the Levant, Egyptian governors adopted local customs to facilitate administration while maintaining allegiance to Thebes. Stele and inscriptions document the establishment of garrisons, supply depots, and fortified towns that ensured both security and the collection of tribute. Egyptian officials were trained in the central scribal bureaucracy, reinforcing the transference of knowledge and reinforcing loyalty. These structures anticipated later imperial models, combining military oversight with administrative integration. Cultural diplomacy complemented these practical strategies. Amenhotep III's marriage alliances extended Egypt's influence through dynastic ties. His wife, Tai, wielded significant political and religious authority, appearing alongside the king in official inscriptions. Foreign princesses brought with them cultural practices and trade networks that strengthened Egypt's connections across the Near East. The Amarna letters record negotiations over gifts of gold, horses, and exotic animals, indicating that material wealth was both a diplomatic tool and a marker of status within the international system. Religion remained intertwined with imperial ideology. Temples dedicated to Ammonius Ra served not only spiritual functions but also legitimized the pharaoh's authority over distant lands. Amenhotep III's building program emphasized grandeur, visibility, and continuity with predecessors. Rituals at Karnak reinforced Egypt's cosmological order. The king, as divine intermediary, maintained Ma'at not only in the Nile Valley but across all territories under Egyptian influence. The synchronization of religion and administration exemplified how ideology underpinned imperial cohesion. In parallel, Egypt's economy expanded to support these endeavors. Tribute from Canaan, Nubia, and Syria supplemented local production, enabling ambitious projects in construction, art, and ceremonial life. The state-managed granaries and workshops ensured that resources were efficiently distributed, supporting both military and religious infrastructure. Evidence from papyri and archaeological sites such as Deir el-Medina confirms the sophistication of this system. Detailed records of labor, rations, and materials demonstrate an advanced logistical apparatus capable of sustaining large-scale imperial operations. By the end of Amenhotep III's reign, Egypt had achieved a remarkable synthesis. Military dominance, diplomatic influence, economic abundance, and monumental expression combined to place the kingdom at the center of the ancient Near Eastern world. Its borders extended from the Fourth Cataract in Nubia to the Euphrates River in Syria, while its ideology projected an image of divinely sanctioned authority. This network of tribute, alliances, and ritual ensured stability and prosperity unprecedented in Egyptian history. Amid this global order, a religious revolution began. Orthodoxy restored stability, but the empire's vigor waned. Following the religious upheaval of Akhenaten's reign, Egypt returned to traditional polytheism under Tutankhamun and his immediate successors. The restoration of the cult of Ammonius, the relocation of the capital to Thebes, and the rehabilitation of temples and priesthoods reaffirmed the ideological foundations that had underpinned the new kingdom's earlier expansion. Tomb inscriptions and temple reliefs from this period emphasize continuity, portraying the pharaoh as both a restorer of Ma'at and the guarantor of cosmic and social order. This return to orthodoxy stabilized internal politics and reestablished central control, but the disruptions of the Amarna period had already begun to erode the structural momentum of imperial authority. The late 18th dynasty faced increasing challenges on multiple fronts. Nubia and the Levant remained under nominal Egyptian control, but local rulers and vassals exploited gaps in central oversight to assert greater autonomy. Records from Ugarit and Byblos, as well as inscriptions at Kadesh, indicate that tribute payments and diplomatic obedience were inconsistent, requiring renewed military attention. The pharaoh's ability to mobilize armies and maintain garrisons persisted, but the scale and decisiveness of campaigns under Thutmose III and Amenhotep III were increasingly difficult to sustain. Economic pressures also began to emerge. monumental construction and temple endowments during the late 18th dynasty, including the completion of Karnak and Luxor projects, placed significant demands on labor and resources. Papyrus records from administrative centers such as Deir el-Medina show detailed rationing of workers, reflecting both logistical sophistication and the limits of state capacity. While the bureaucracy remained functional, the concentration of wealth and labor toward religious and ceremonial projects reduced flexibility for military and frontier initiatives, subtly constraining Egypt's ability to project power abroad. Culturally, the aftermath of the Amarna experiment influenced art and ideology. Even after the official restoration of the old gods, certain artistic conventions, such as more naturalistic depictions of the royal family and human figures, persisted. Inscriptions emphasized the pharaoh's role as both divine and human intermediary, integrating lessons from Akhenaten's radical experimentation into a framework of renewed orthodoxy. Temples were rebuilt and embellished, reaffirming ritual as the primary mechanism for maintaining cosmic and political stability. Nevertheless, the empire's vigor was not entirely extinguished. Successors such as Horemheb and Ramesses I focused on consolidating Egypt's borders, restoring the authority of provincial governors, and reorganizing the military. Their policies reinforced central control and prepared the state for the expansive campaigns of the 19th dynasty. The late 18th dynasty thus represents a period of recovery and recalibration. Egypt retained the trappings of empire and maintained territorial reach, but the combination of internal disruption, administrative strain, and shifting international dynamics marked a gradual decline in the intensity of imperial projection. By the mid-14th century BCE, Egypt had reaffirmed ideological and administrative orthodoxy, ensuring continuity and internal cohesion. However, the lessons of Akhenaten's reign underscored the delicate balance between innovation and stability, revealing that even a civilization as resilient as Egypt could be temporarily destabilized by radical centralization of religious and political power. The kingdom emerged restored yet cautious, ready to defend its borders but increasingly attentive to the limitations imposed by internal and external pressures. The stage was set for the next phase of the new kingdom, in which military ambition and administrative consolidation would define the reign of the 19th dynasty, ushering in a renewed era of expansion and monumental achievement. Fragmentation returned, though Egypt's culture endured. Following the long and illustrious reign of Ramesses II, circa 1279 to 1213 BCE, Egypt entered a period of political and economic instability. While the pharaoh's military achievements, including the famous Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites and the subsequent peace treaty, the earliest known in history, demonstrated diplomatic acumen, the empire's control over distant territories weakened. Border garrisons in Canaan, Syria, and Nubia faced increasing pressure from local uprisings and external threats, including the enigmatic Sea Peoples, whose incursions disrupted trade and settlements along the eastern Mediterranean. Economic records, including the papyrus Harissai, indicate that the central treasury continued to support monumental projects and temple endowments. Yet these resources could no longer fully compensate for declining agricultural yields and strained trade networks. Inflation, labor shortages, and the rising power of regional officials eroded central authority. The once cohesive imperial administration became increasingly decentralized, with provincial governors assuming greater autonomy and often acting independently of the pharaoh's direct oversight. Despite political fragmentation, Egypt's cultural and religious institutions remained resilient. Temples continued to function as centers of ritual, learning, and economic activity, while art and architecture preserved traditional forms and motifs. The Egyptian language, literary canon, and religious practices endured, providing continuity through periods of turbulence. This resilience ensured that even as the political structure weakened, the civilization's identity, spiritual framework, and administrative knowledge persisted, setting the stage for later revivals under the Third Intermediate Period. Egypt's experience during the late New Kingdom illustrates the delicate balance between imperial ambition and structural sustainability. The grandeur of the Ramesside era masked underlying vulnerabilities, demonstrating that even one of history's most enduring civilizations could face decline without internal cohesion and economic stability. This gradual disintegration paved the way for the decentralization and localism characteristic of the Third Intermediate Period. A brief renaissance followed under native Sate rulers. After centuries of political fragmentation and intermittent foreign domination, Egypt experienced a period of restoration under the 26th dynasty, commonly called the Sate period, c. 664 to 525 BCE. Centered in Sais in the western delta, native rulers such as Psamtik I capitalized on declining Assyrian influence to reunify the country, re-establish centralized authority, and revive traditional religious and artistic practices. This renaissance emphasized continuity with Egypt's storied past, deliberately invoking Old and Middle Kingdom motifs in both architecture and royal iconography to legitimize Sate rule. Administrative reforms were a cornerstone of this revival. Psamtik I reorganized provincial governance, balancing local autonomy with centralized oversight. Officials were appointed from loyal families and trained in classical scribal and bureaucratic practices, ensuring the maintenance of tribute systems, tax collection, and resource distribution. The reconstitution of a disciplined bureaucracy reflected both practical governance and ideological continuity. The pharaoh remained the guarantor of Ma'at, responsible for the cosmic and social order of the two lands. The Sate kings also pursued economic expansion and international engagement. They re-established trade networks that had lapsed under the Libyan and Nubian dynasties, connecting Egypt with Cyprus, the Levant, and the wider Mediterranean. Imported goods, including luxury items, copper, and timber, flowed into Egyptian ports, supporting both elite consumption and monumental building projects. The revitalization of trade bolstered the state treasury and allowed for investments in temples, fortifications, and public works, signaling both material prosperity and ideological legitimacy. Artistic and religious developments reinforced the sense of revival. Sate pharaohs deliberately emulated the forms and proportions of Old Kingdom sculpture, creating statues that emphasized idealized kingship and permanence. Temples were constructed or renovated with careful adherence to canonical layouts, including sanctuaries for Ammonius, Ptah, and other principal deities. Reliefs and inscriptions frequently referenced historical precedents, presenting the Sate rulers as restorers of a timeless order disrupted by previous centuries of foreign domination. Military organization during this period was cautious but effective. Egypt no longer projected power deep into the Near East as during the New Kingdom, but fortified borders in the Delta and southern Nubia were maintained. Mercenary forces, including Greek and Libyan troops, supplemented the native army, reflecting a pragmatic approach to defense. Campaigns were primarily defensive or aimed at suppressing internal unrest, emphasizing stability over expansion. Despite these achievements, the Sate Renaissance was constrained by regional geopolitics. Assyrian influence lingered along the eastern frontier, and rising powers in Babylon and Persia would eventually challenge Egyptian sovereignty. The dynasty's success lay not in imperial conquest but in consolidation, cultural restoration, and the projection of legitimacy through art, religion, and administration. By the end of the Sate period, Egypt had regained a measure of unity and internal stability. The combination of centralized bureaucracy, revived religious authority, and economic revitalization enabled a brief but significant renaissance, demonstrating the resilience of Egyptian political and cultural systems. This period of restoration ultimately set the stage for the Persian conquest, marking the transition from a renewed native administration to the imposition of foreign imperial rule. In its twilight, Egypt rediscovered its ancient voice through foreign eyes. The reign of Psamtik I, c. 664 to 610 BCE, marked a deliberate and methodical restoration of Egypt's political and cultural sovereignty after centuries of fragmentation under Libyan, Nubian, and Assyrian domination. Emerging as the most powerful local ruler following the decline of Assyrian authority in the Near East, Psamtik I leveraged both military acumen and diplomatic initiative to reunify Upper and Lower Egypt. He established Sais as the administrative and ceremonial center of the country, reviving centralized governance while maintaining pragmatic relations with the surrounding Mediterranean powers. His unification strategy combined political marriages, the co-optation of regional elites, and the reassertion of traditional royal prerogatives, reinforcing his legitimacy as a pharaoh whose authority was both ancient and divinely sanctioned. A critical aspect of this renaissance was the establishment of Greek mercenary settlements along the Nile Delta. Psamtik recognized the military utility of these highly trained foreign soldiers, whose presence provided both a buffer against external threats and a loyal counterbalance to potentially rebellious native forces. Excavations at sites such as Naucratis reveal the dual character of these settlements. Militarily strategic, yet also commercial and cultural conduits connecting Egypt with the wider Mediterranean world. The Greeks brought not only martial expertise but also new forms of material culture, art, and trade networks, fostering a cosmopolitan atmosphere in the delta that contrasted with the relative isolation of Upper Egypt. The integration of mercenary communities exemplified Egypt's adaptability, demonstrating a capacity to absorb and repurpose foreign elements to strengthen state authority. Trade and diplomatic exchange during the Sate period reached new levels of sophistication. Egypt actively engaged with Lydia, Ionia, and other eastern Mediterranean polities, importing timber, metals, and luxury goods while exporting grain, papyrus, and crafted wares. Archaeological evidence from ports such as Sais, Naucratis, and Canopus indicates the circulation of Lydian and Greek amphorae, jewelry, and ceramics, attesting to both commercial and cultural exchange. Egyptian officials maintained records of these transactions, ensuring that tribute and customs duties flowed into the state treasury. These connections reveal a nuanced economic policy. Psamtik balanced the cultivation of foreign trade with the preservation of internal resources, using wealth generated from exchange to support monumental construction, temple endowments, and administrative infrastructure. Monumental art and architecture flourished as a tangible expression of the Sate revival. Pharaohs deliberately emulated Old Kingdom forms, producing statues, reliefs, and temple complexes that referenced Egypt's classical heritage. The use of idealized proportions, canonical postures, and hieroglyphic precision reaffirmed continuity with Egypt's past while asserting contemporary authority. Temples were rebuilt or refurbished at sites such as Karnak, Luxor, and Sais, reflecting both religious devotion and political legitimacy. Inscriptions emphasize the pharaoh as a restorer of order, linking Psamtik achievements to those of revered ancestors and creating a narrative of national resurgence that legitimized his rule in the eyes of both domestic and foreign audiences. Religious institutions were central to this program of restoration. The priesthood of Ammonius regained its preeminent position, overseeing rituals, economic activities, and the administration of temple estates. The Sate kings reinforced the divine relationship between pharaoh and gods, emphasizing that political unification and cultural revival were expressions of cosmic order. Temple complexes functioned as hubs of economic production, storage, and administration, reflecting the interdependence of religious authority and state power. By channeling tribute and labor into religious endowments, Psamtik ensured that monuments and cult practices symbolized both continuity and centralization. Diplomacy complemented these domestic initiatives. Correspondence with foreign rulers, though less extensive than during the 18th dynasty, demonstrates Egypt's awareness of Mediterranean geopolitics. Treaties, gift exchanges, and trade agreements with Lydia, Ionia, and other city-states reinforced Egypt's prestige and facilitated access to strategic resources such as silver, copper, and fine timber. Greek artisans and traders stationed in the delta acted as intermediaries, creating a conduit through which foreign ideas, technologies, and artistic forms entered Egyptian society. This openness reflected a pragmatic flexibility. While firmly asserting native authority, Psamtik exploited the opportunities presented by a changing geopolitical environment to strengthen his state. Cultural adaptation extended to artistic and technological practices. Greek influence is visible in pottery styles, decorative motifs, and urban layouts, particularly in port cities designed to accommodate foreign merchants and military contingents. Egyptian craftsmen selectively incorporated these elements into traditional forms, producing hybrid styles that signaled both continuity and innovation. Tomb reliefs, Statuary and wall inscriptions during the Sate period consciously reference the grandeur of Old Kingdom prototypes, while adapting scale, detail, and iconography to the contemporary context. The resulting visual culture projected an image of Egypt as both enduring and responsive, capable of asserting its heritage while engaging with a broader Mediterranean milieu. Despite this revival, structural vulnerabilities remained. The Sate kings maintained authority over the Nile Valley and Delta, but external pressures from the rising Persian Empire increasingly threatened Egypt's independence. Records indicate that local elites, while nominally loyal, were occasionally assertive, exploiting periods of internal transition to expand their influence. Economically, the state's reliance on tribute and trade left it susceptible to fluctuations in foreign markets, maritime disruptions, and political instability abroad. The balance between domestic consolidation and Mediterranean engagement required constant management and vigilance. By the end of the Sate period, Egypt had successfully reaffirmed its sovereignty, reinvigorated its cultural and religious institutions, and integrated foreign elements into its political and economic systems. Psamtik I and his successors demonstrated that even in its twilight, Egypt retained the capacity for strategic adaptation, combining revivalist ideology with pragmatic engagement. Trade, mercenary networks, and artistic innovation allowed the kingdom to thrive despite external pressures, highlighting a civilization capable of leveraging foreign influences to reinforce its own identity. Yet these achievements were ultimately temporary. The arrival of the Persians in 525 BCE brought the Sate dynasty to an end, terminating Egypt's final period of sustained native independence. The dynasty's administrative, cultural, and diplomatic accomplishments, however, left a durable legacy. Egypt's political structures, religious traditions, and engagement with the Mediterranean would continue to influence subsequent periods under foreign rule. For the first time, Egypt became a province within a global empire. In 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II launched a decisive campaign that ended the 26th dynasty's final assertion of native sovereignty. Contemporary sources, including the Greek historian Herodotus, describe Cambyses' rapid advance into the Nile Delta, culminating in the conquest of Memphis. Archaeological evidence supports the speed and thoroughness of Persian occupation. Administrative seals, inscriptions, and fortifications indicate that the Achaemenids quickly established control over key urban and economic centers. Egypt was incorporated as a satrapy, or provincial entity, within the sprawling Achaemenid Empire, subject to taxation, garrisoned by Persian forces, and governed by appointed satraps who answered directly to the king in Persepolis. The Persian administration sought to integrate Egypt into the imperial system, while maintaining elements of traditional governance to ensure local compliance. Satraps, often members of the royal family or trusted Persian nobles, oversaw tribute collection, military obligations, and infrastructure maintenance. They relied heavily on existing Egyptian bureaucratic frameworks, retaining local scribes, tax officials, and temple administrators. Documents from this period, including the Demotic Papyri of Elephantine, reveal that Egyptians continued to manage day-to-day affairs under Persian oversight, highlighting the empire's strategy of indirect rule. Religious institutions, particularly the temples of Ammonius at Thebes and Ptah at Memphis, retained economic influence, as Persian rulers understood the stabilizing effect of priestly authority on local populations. Despite these administrative accommodations, Egyptian resentment persisted. Revolts erupted repeatedly, underscoring the limits of Persian control. Notably, uprisings led by native leaders such as Pechebastus III c. 522 to 520 BCE attempted to reassert independence in the Delta and Upper Egypt, though they were ultimately suppressed by Persian military campaigns. Archaeological traces of destruction, coupled with inscriptions celebrating Persian victories, demonstrate that these conflicts were costly and widespread. The persistence of rebellion reveals both the resilience of Egyptian identity and the challenge of governing a territory with a long history of centralized kingship. The Achaemenid period also introduced new administrative and economic practices. Persian satraps standardized taxation and tribute in silver and grain, aligning Egypt's contributions with broader imperial requirements. Infrastructure improvements, such as canal maintenance and road construction, facilitated both military mobility and trade. The Persian administration encouraged the export of Egyptian agricultural products, papyrus, and luxury goods to the empire's centers in Mesopotamia, Persia, and the Mediterranean. These policies reinforced Egypt's integration into a global economy while ensuring that local elites benefited from participation in imperial networks. Cultural and religious policy during Persian rule was characterized by a pragmatic balance of imposition and accommodation. While Persian rulers asserted their authority through inscriptions and coinage, they adopted Egyptian royal titulary and participated in traditional rituals. Cambyses II and his successors, including Darius I, commissioned temple restorations and made offerings to native deities, presenting themselves as legitimate pharaohs while maintaining Persian sovereignty. Reliefs and inscriptions at sites such as Sais, Memphis, and Karnak attest to these symbolic gestures, demonstrating a careful fusion of imperial ideology with local religious tradition. The Persian period also had significant demographic and military implications. Persian garrisons stationed throughout the Delta and Nile Valley facilitated control but introduced a foreign presence that occasionally clashed with local populations. Administrative centers, including the newly fortified cities of Bubastis and Sais, functioned as both bureaucratic hubs and military strongpoints, reflecting the dual priorities of governance and security. At the same time, Persian reliance on Egyptian labor and resources underscored the interdependence between imperial oversight and local economic structures. The 27th dynasty, First Persian period, ended in 404 BCE, when native Egyptian rulers briefly regained independence under the 28th to 30th dynasties. These decades saw a resurgence of traditional administration, temple patronage, and regional authority, reflecting the enduring strength of Egyptian institutions despite prior foreign domination. Leaders such as Nectanebo I and Nectanebo II fortified cities, expanded irrigation projects, and restored religious complexes, seeking both to assert political legitimacy and to reestablish national pride. Archaeological evidence from Memphis, Thebes, and Saqqara indicates that temple building and cultural production remained vigorous during this brief renaissance, preserving the structural and symbolic continuity of Egyptian civilization. However, this period of autonomy was short-lived. In 343 BCE, Artaxerxes III of Persia reconquered Egypt, inaugurating the Second Persian period, 31st dynasty. Despite repeated attempts at resistance, including fortifications along the Nile and campaigns in the Delta, Egyptian rulers were unable to withstand the military superiority of the Achaemenid forces. The Persian reconquest marked the final phase of imperial rule before the arrival of a new, foreign power, Macedonia under Alexander the Great. Throughout the Achaemenid occupation, Egypt's integration into a global imperial network left lasting administrative and cultural legacies. The satrapal system, standardized taxation, and infrastructure improvements influenced subsequent governance models under Hellenistic and Roman rule. At the same time, recurrent revolts, persistent temple authority, and enduring local identity demonstrated that foreign domination, however well organized, could never fully suppress Egypt's internal cohesion. By the mid-4th century BCE, Egypt had experienced both full incorporation into a vast empire and a fleeting return to native sovereignty. This cyclical pattern of foreign domination and indigenous restoration highlighted the resilience of its institutions and the persistent symbolic authority of the pharaoh, even when actual political power was limited. After brief independence, a new conqueror from Macedonia arrived, poised to reshape Egypt's political and cultural landscape once more. Alexander's arrival bridged pharaonic legacy and Greek ambition. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great completed his conquest of Egypt, a campaign largely conducted without significant resistance, as the Persian garrisons had been weakened by prior revolts and political instability. Greek and Macedonian sources, including Arrian and Diodorus Siculus, record that Alexander was welcomed in the Nile Delta as a liberator, with local elites perceiving the Macedonian king as preferable to continued Persian rule. Archaeological evidence, including coinage and inscriptions from Memphis and the Delta, corroborates these accounts, highlighting both the rapidity of his advance and the strategic diplomacy that characterized his Egyptian campaign. Alexander's arrival marked not only a military conquest but also the integration of Egypt into the broader Hellenistic world, setting the stage for enduring administrative and cultural transformations. A key element of Alexander's strategy was the foundation of Alexandria on the western edge of the Nile Delta. Chosen for its strategic location near the Mediterranean and at the junction of Nile trade routes, Alexandria was conceived as a hub for commerce, administration, and Greek settlement. Urban planning emphasized the integration of military, administrative, and commercial functions. Broad streets, harbors, and civic spaces reflected Greek ideals of city design while accommodating the realities of the Egyptian landscape. Archaeological surveys reveal fortifications, early harbor installations, and initial residential layouts that would serve as the foundation for Alexandria's emergence as the premier urban center of the Hellenistic world. Alexander's approach to governance combined respect for Egyptian religious and political traditions with Macedonian administrative efficiency. In Siwa Oasis, he visited the renowned Oracle of Ammonius, where he was reportedly confirmed as the son of the deity, a symbolic act that legitimized his rule in traditional Egyptian terms. This recognition reinforced the continuity of pharaonic authority while simultaneously introducing the Macedonian king as a divinely sanctioned ruler. Inscriptions and reliefs at Siwa suggest that Alexander's engagement with local religious institutions was both ritualistic and politically calculated, signaling to Egyptian elites that Macedonian rule would respect established sacred hierarchies. Administrative structures under Alexander reflected a blend of Egyptian and Greek systems. Native bureaucrats were retained in positions of civil management, particularly in overseeing agricultural production, taxation, and temple estates, while Macedonian officers controlled military forces and strategic urban centers. This dual system maintained the continuity of local governance while facilitating integration into Alexander's broader empire. Papyrus records from the Delta demonstrate that Egyptian fiscal practices, such as grain assessments and tribute collection, continued largely unchanged, illustrating a pragmatic accommodation that minimized disruption and fostered stability. The foundation of Alexandria also had profound cultural and economic implications. Intended as a center of Hellenistic learning and commerce, the city attracted settlers from across the Mediterranean, including Greeks, Macedonians, and Jews. Trade networks connected Alexandria to the Aegean, the Levant, and the Red Sea, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and artistic traditions. Early architectural and urban planning initiatives reveal an emphasis on monumental public spaces, administrative complexes, and religious precincts, signaling that Alexandria was intended not merely as a military outpost, but as a permanent symbol of Hellenistic presence and integration with Egypt's established cultural heritage. Religious legitimacy remained central to Alexander's policy. By participating in Egyptian cultic practices and presenting himself as a pharaoh, he bridged the symbolic authority of Egypt with the military and political power of Macedon. Coins minted during his brief stay depict him with Egyptian regalia alongside Greek symbols, illustrating the deliberate synthesis of traditions. This dual representation reinforced the perception that Alexander was both a foreign conqueror and a legitimate Egyptian ruler, capable of maintaining the continuity of pharaonic authority while introducing new governance structures. Alexander's campaign also had long-term strategic consequences. Control of Egypt provided a secure base for further eastern conquests and established the Nile Delta as a critical link between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, facilitating trade with Arabia, India, and the Horn of Africa. The integration of Egypt into a Hellenistic economic and military network expanded the empire's resources and influence, positioning Alexandria as both a commercial hub and a military strongpoint. The city's harbors enabled naval operations and supported the movement of troops and supplies, demonstrating the foresight behind Alexander's urban and logistical planning. By the time of Alexander's departure, Egypt had experienced both continuity and transformation. The pharaonic system of religious authority and bureaucratic management remained intact, while Greek settlement, Hellenistic urban planning, and Macedonian military structures introduced new dynamics that would shape the kingdom for centuries. The foundation of Alexandria symbolized the confluence of these elements, a city that embodied the enduring traditions of Egypt while serving as a platform for Hellenistic innovation and expansion. Alexander's death in 323 BCE left Egypt under the control of his general Ptolemy I Soter, who would consolidate Macedonian authority while preserving Egyptian institutions. Ptolemy's administration maintained the dual system established by Alexander, employing native scribes alongside Greek officials, sustaining temple revenues, and continuing trade networks initiated under Macedonian oversight. This continuity ensured that Egypt remained both culturally Egyptian and politically integrated into the Hellenistic world. The Egyptian experience under Alexander illustrates the delicate balance between conquest, legitimacy, and integration. Military dominance was reinforced through symbolic acts, administrative pragmatism, and urban innovation. By bridging pharaonic legacy with Greek ambition, Alexander established a foundation for the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would fuse these worlds into a new cultural synthesis characterized by enduring architectural, economic, and religious innovations. The successors of Alexander would expand upon this synthesis, using Alexandria as the epicenter of a Hellenistic Egypt where Greek and Egyptian traditions coexisted, creating a durable legacy that endured for nearly 3 centuries. Macedonian kings ruled Egypt in pharaonic form. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his empire was divided among his generals, with Ptolemy I Soter securing Egypt as his domain. By 305 BCE, Ptolemy had firmly established himself as pharaoh, adopting Egyptian titulary, participating in traditional religious rituals, and presenting himself as the legitimate heir to the pharaonic lineage. This deliberate integration into Egyptian ideological structures was critical to consolidating authority over a diverse population accustomed to centralized kingship. Ptolemy's reign initiated the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Macedonian Greek ruling house that would maintain power for nearly 3 centuries, balancing Greek administrative efficiency with the symbolic legitimacy of ancient Egyptian governance. Administrative reforms under Ptolemy I were extensive and deliberately dual in character. Greek bureaucrats occupied key positions within the central administration, overseeing taxation, treasury management, and military logistics, while native Egyptian scribes and officials continued to manage local governance, temple estates, and agricultural production. This bilingual and bicultural system is well documented in inscriptions, including the Rosetta Stone, which preserves decrees in Egyptian hieroglyphs, Demotic script, and Greek. The coexistence of these languages in official documents exemplifies the Ptolemy's pragmatic approach. Greek functioned as the language of state administration and diplomacy, while Egyptian maintained continuity with religious, social, and local civic practices. Economically, the Ptolemies leveraged Egypt's agricultural productivity, particularly the Nile's fertile delta, to create a surplus that supported both domestic and foreign ambitions. Granaries, canals, and irrigation projects were expanded or renovated to ensure stable harvests and facilitate the transport of goods. Papyrus archives from Ptolemaic estates indicate detailed management of labor, crop allocation, and tribute collection, reflecting a highly organized bureaucracy capable of sustaining a growing population and funding extensive building programs. Wealth generated from agriculture, trade, and taxation enabled the Ptolemies to sponsor monumental construction, maintain mercenary armies, and engage in international commerce, reinforcing both political control and cultural prestige. Temple patronage played a central role in consolidating legitimacy. Ptolemy I and his successors funded the restoration and expansion of major cult complexes, including Karnak, Philae, and Edfu, often inscribing their donations and deeds in both Greek and Egyptian scripts. These projects reaffirmed the traditional religious hierarchy and reinforced the pharaoh's role as mediator between gods and people. By actively participating in temple rituals, making offerings, and commissioning statues and reliefs, the Ptolemies presented themselves as faithful pharaohs, capable of maintaining cosmic order while introducing new administrative and cultural practices. Culturally, Alexandria became the centerpiece of Ptolemaic innovation. Designed as both a port city and an administrative hub, it attracted Greek, Macedonian, and Egyptian elites, merchants, and artisans. The city's layout featured wide streets, harbors, temples, and civic spaces, supporting a diverse and cosmopolitan population. Alexandria quickly emerged as a center of learning and culture, with institutions such as the Mouseion and Library of Alexandria promoting scholarship, literature, and science. The convergence of Egyptian and Greek intellectual traditions fostered an environment in which religious, literary, and scientific knowledge could be preserved, adapted, and transmitted across the Mediterranean world. Diplomacy and military organization were closely tied to the administration and economy. The Ptolemies maintained standing armies composed of Greek and Macedonian mercenaries, supplemented by native troops, to defend borders and project influence in the eastern Mediterranean. Naval power was particularly significant, allowing control over the Nile Delta, the Red Sea, and trade routes to Crete, Cyprus, and the Levant. Strategic alliances with Hellenistic states, often cemented through marriage or tribute agreements, reinforced Egypt's position as a major regional power, while simultaneously safeguarding the economic foundations that underpinned the dynasty's authority. Legal and social structures reflected the fusion of Greek and Egyptian systems. Greek law applied to citizens and mercenaries, while Egyptians largely adhered to traditional customary and temple law. Local councils, overseen by both Greek and native officials, administered civic affairs, resolved disputes, and managed economic activity. The coexistence of these systems facilitated governance across a culturally heterogeneous population, balancing innovation with continuity. Administrative papyri, inscriptions, and temple records document the careful coordination required to maintain order, collect taxes, and oversee both urban and rural populations. The Ptolemaic approach to governance combines symbolic legitimacy, economic exploitation, cultural integration, and military control. By presenting themselves in pharaonic form while implementing a highly organized Greek-style administration, the Ptolemies created a state capable of sustaining both internal stability and external influence. Their policies ensured that Egyptian institutions, particularly temples, scribal traditions, and local governance, remained active participants in state life, even as the Macedonian rulers exercised centralized power. By the end of Ptolemy I's reign and the early years of his successors, Egypt had achieved a period of relative stability and prosperity. Agricultural wealth, maritime trade, and urban development underpinned a strong economy, while cultural and religious patronage reinforced legitimacy. The dynasty's unique synthesis of Greek and Egyptian governance established a durable framework for successive rulers, who would continue to navigate the complexities of a bicultural society while engaging in Mediterranean diplomacy and commerce. Economic growth, administrative consolidation, and cultural integration under the Ptolemies laid the foundations for centuries of stability and tension, enabling Egypt to remain a major Mediterranean power despite the persistent challenges posed by internal factionalism, foreign intervention, and the demands of a multicultural population. This combination of prosperity and fragility would characterize the Ptolemaic state for the remainder of its 3-century history. In Alexandria, knowledge became the new monument. During the later Ptolemaic period, from approximately 246 to 150 BCE, Alexandria emerged as a center of intellectual, economic, and religious activity, reflecting the dynasty's dual emphasis on Hellenistic innovation and Egyptian tradition. The Library of Alexandria, along with the associated Mouseion, became a symbol of the dynasty's commitment to scholarship. Greek, Egyptian, and other Mediterranean texts were collected, copied, and studied, creating a hub for research in philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. Scholars such as Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the Earth, and Herophilus, a pioneer in anatomy, exemplify the intellectual vitality of this era. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that these institutions were state-sponsored, with royal patronage ensuring both the acquisition of manuscripts and the provision of stipends for resident scholars. Economic activity during this period reflected both Egypt's agricultural foundation and its integration into Mediterranean trade networks. The Nile's fertile floodplain continued to support extensive grain cultivation, which supplied local populations and exported surplus to Greece, Italy, and other Hellenistic states. Greek papyri from sites such as Oxyrhynchus and Phaeum provide detailed records of taxation, land tenure, and labor obligations, demonstrating sophisticated administrative oversight. These documents show that land was classified according to productivity, with taxes assessed in kind or currency, and that both native Egyptians and Greek settlers contributed to state revenues. The administration's careful management of resources allowed the Ptolemies to fund public works, maintain mercenary armies, and sponsor monumental construction projects in Alexandria, Memphis, and other major cities. Religious life in Egypt remained a persistent and stabilizing force despite Hellenistic influence. Traditional Egyptian cults continued to operate temples, oversee ritual cycles, and manage economic estates. Temples dedicated to Ammonius, Isis, Osiris, and Horus retained significant wealth and influence, often interacting with Greek settlers and officials. The Ptolemies sought to integrate themselves into these religious frameworks, presenting themselves as pharaohs capable of upholding Ma'at, maintaining cosmic order, and supporting the priesthoods. Inscriptions and temple reliefs from this period document royal donations, ceremonial participation, and the construction or refurbishment of cult complexes, demonstrating a sustained investment in religious legitimacy as a complement to administrative and military authority. Trade and commerce in the Mediterranean further enhanced Alexandria's prominence. The city's harbors, including the Great Harbor and Pharos Port, facilitated the movement of grain, papyrus, textiles, and luxury goods such as glass, jewelry, and imported timber. Egyptian merchants, Greek traders, and foreign intermediaries participated in a vibrant network that connected Egypt with Syria, Cyprus, Crete, and Italy. Maritime commerce provided both revenue and cultural exchange, introducing Hellenistic styles, technologies, and ideas into Egyptian urban life. Market regulations, recorded in papyri, ensured consistent taxation and prevented monopolies, reflecting the administrative sophistication required to manage a cosmopolitan port city. The Ptolemies also promoted intellectual patronage as a tool of soft power. The Mouseion served as a residence for scholars, a venue for public lectures, and a center for literary and scientific production. The accumulation of texts, often copied and catalogued systematically, allowed Egypt to become a repository of global knowledge. This intellectual prestige complemented the dynasty's political and economic power, projecting influence across the Mediterranean world and attracting students, scribes, and researchers from diverse regions. The fusion of Greek and Egyptian intellectual traditions created an environment in which science, literature, and philosophy flourished alongside the preservation of traditional Egyptian learning. Administrative records reveal that the Ptolemaic state maintained rigorous oversight of agricultural estates, labor distribution, and resource allocation. Greek officials supervised grain storage and distribution, while local Egyptian scribes monitored crop yields and land tenure. Legal and fiscal documentation from Phaeum and Oxyrhynchus shows standardized contracts, detailed inventories, and clear delineations of property rights, indicating a highly organized bureaucracy capable of sustaining both urban and rural populations. This system enabled the dynasty to fund military campaigns, support monumental architecture, and maintain Alexandria as a center of international trade and scholarship. Cultural synthesis was also evident in art, literature, and civic life. Greek architectural forms, public spaces, and urban planning coexisted with Egyptian religious iconography and monumental statuary. Temples and civic buildings often displayed bilingual inscriptions in Greek and Egyptian, signaling both administrative pragmatism and cultural integration. Festivals, rituals, and royal ceremonies incorporated elements from both traditions, reinforcing the Ptolemies' legitimacy and facilitating coexistence among the diverse populations of Alexandria and the Nile Valley. Despite these achievements, underlying tensions persisted. Dynastic rivalries within the Ptolemaic family periodically erupted into civil conflict, creating political instability that required careful management. These struggles, combined with external pressures from emerging Mediterranean powers, revealed the fragility inherent in a system that relied on both centralized control and the cooperation of a culturally heterogeneous population. Nevertheless, the dynasty's economic, religious, and scholarly initiatives sustained Egypt as a major Mediterranean state, maintaining both internal cohesion and international prestige. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Alexandria had become a lasting testament to the Ptolemies' ability to fuse Egyptian and Greek traditions. Knowledge, commerce, and religion functioned as intertwined pillars of statecraft. The Library of Alexandria preserved intellectual continuity, temples anchored traditional authority, and trade networks ensured economic resilience. This integration of systems not only stabilized Egypt internally but also projected influence across the Hellenistic world. Yet the dynasty's internal divisions, coupled with the rising power of Rome, foreshadowed the eventual end of independent Ptolemaic rule. While the state remained economically productive, culturally vibrant, and administratively sophisticated, the combination of dynastic conflict and foreign intervention would soon challenge the kingdom's autonomy, marking the transition to Roman governance. This period thus represents the height of Ptolemaic integration, a civilization in which Greek and Egyptian elements coexisted dynamically, fostering economic growth, religious continuity, and intellectual innovation. Alexandria became the symbolic and practical heart of this synthesis, demonstrating that even in its later centuries, Egypt could reinvent its political, cultural, and scholarly identity while preserving core aspects of its ancient heritage. With Cleopatra's fall, 3 millennia of pharaonic sovereignty ended. Cleopatra VII ascended the Ptolemaic throne in 69 BCE, inheriting a kingdom weakened by internal dynastic strife and external pressures from the expanding Roman Republic. Her reign was marked by political acumen, strategic alliances, and an unprecedented level of personal involvement in governance. Cleopatra navigated the complex relationship between Egypt and Rome through diplomacy, marriage alliances, and personal liaisons with key Roman figures, including Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony. Contemporary accounts, corroborated by coinage, inscriptions, and temple reliefs, indicate that Cleopatra presented herself both as a traditional pharaoh and as a Hellenistic monarch capable of engaging in Mediterranean power politics. Cleopatra's administrative reforms and economic initiatives aimed to stabilize the kingdom internally while securing its strategic position. She maintained control over the central bureaucracy, ensuring efficient tax collection and resource allocation. Agricultural production in the Nile Delta remained the economic backbone, supporting both domestic needs and tribute obligations to Rome. Temple patronage continued, reinforcing her legitimacy as pharaoh. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Philae, Dendra, and Alexandria demonstrates her active engagement in temple construction and restoration, signaling continuity with centuries of religious practice. Externally, Cleopatra's reign was dominated by the challenge of Roman intervention. Egypt's economic wealth, particularly its grain surplus, made it a vital asset for Rome. Cleopatra sought to leverage this importance through alliances that preserved her authority while protecting Egypt's interests. Her political and military collaboration with Mark Antony exemplified the fusion of domestic governance with international strategy. Coinage depicting Cleopatra alongside Roman leaders, as well as contemporary literary accounts, illustrate the careful cultivation of both Egyptian and Mediterranean political legitimacy. Despite these efforts, the final conflict with Rome proved decisive. The defeat of Antony and Cleopatra by Octavian at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, followed by Cleopatra's death later that year, ended Ptolemaic sovereignty. Egypt was annexed as a Roman province, and the pharaonic institution, which had persisted for over 3 millennia, ceased to exist as an independent political entity. Roman administration replaced native governance, though many aspects of the Ptolemaic bureaucratic and religious systems were retained to ensure continuity and stability under imperial rule. Propaganda and archaeology from Cleopatra's reign reveal both her political strategy and her cultural messaging. Coins, statues, and inscriptions emphasize her dual role as a Hellenistic queen and traditional pharaoh, projecting authority across Egyptian and Mediterranean audiences. Temples commissioned or restored under her patronage underscore her adherence to local religious traditions, while urban and harbor projects in Alexandria reflect her engagement with Hellenistic civic culture. These material remains provide insight into the ways Cleopatra sought to consolidate power internally while negotiating the complex dynamics of international politics. By the end of her reign, Egypt had transitioned from a semi-independent Hellenistic kingdom into a Roman province. The administrative, economic, and cultural frameworks established under the Ptolemies continued to function under Roman oversight, but the dynastic sovereignty that had defined Egypt for millennia had ended. Cleopatra's life and death thus mark both the culmination of the Ptolemaic synthesis of Greek and Egyptian traditions and the definitive conclusion of native pharaonic rule. Egypt now entered the Roman world, beginning a new chapter in its long and continuous history of adaptation, integration, and resilience. Rome governed Egypt as the empire's granary and a source of prestige. After 30 BCE, Egypt was formally annexed by Rome and designated a special imperial province, directly controlled by the emperor rather than the Senate. This unique status reflected both Egypt's strategic importance as a source of grain and its potential as a political power base. The emperor appointed a praefectus Egypti, a Roman equestrian official, to oversee administration, taxation, and law enforcement. The prefect exercised extraordinary authority, combining civil, military, and fiscal powers, ensuring that Egypt remained tightly integrated into imperial structures. Military garrisons, including cohorts stationed along the Nile and in the Delta, enforced Roman authority, while a network of local officials, often drawn from native or Hellenized elites, managed day-to-day administration. The grain economy was central to Roman interests. Egypt's fertile Nile Delta produced a substantial surplus, which was shipped to Rome and other Mediterranean cities to feed the population and support imperial ambitions. Papyrus records from Fayum, Oxyrhynchus, and Karanis provide detailed accounts of agricultural production, irrigation management, and land tenure, illustrating the sophisticated bureaucratic mechanisms used to collect, store, and transport grain. Estates were organized into large units, often leased to private tenants or managed by state-appointed administrators, ensuring consistent yields. Taxes were levied in kind or currency, with strict oversight to prevent shortfalls and maintain the reliability of supply to Rome. Roman administration also maintained continuity with Egyptian religious and cultural institutions. Temples across the Nile Valley continued to operate, serving both religious and economic functions. Priesthoods retained control over temple estates, labor management, and ritual cycles, while participating in the broader imperial system through taxation and tribute. Temples functioned as centers of local authority, providing stability and legitimacy within the Roman provincial framework. Archaeological evidence from Memphis, Thebes, and Philly documents temple renovations, inscriptions, and dedications during this period, demonstrating the persistence of traditional religious practice under Roman oversight. Alexandria, as Egypt's principal city and a key Mediterranean port, exemplified the integration of Roman governance with local urban life. The city's population was ethnically and culturally diverse, including Greeks, Jews, Egyptians, and Romans. Civic structures, including theaters, baths, and public fora, were constructed in the Hellenistic and Roman styles, providing spaces for commerce, administration, and social interaction. Roman law governed public affairs, while local customs and Egyptian religious practice continued to influence daily life. The city's strategic location facilitated maritime trade, intellectual exchange, and political communication, reinforcing its role as the economic and cultural hub of the province. Population structure in Roman Egypt reflected the complexity of imperial administration. Roman citizens, predominantly officials and military personnel, held privileged status, while Greek settlers and native Egyptians occupied varied social roles within urban and rural settings. Slavery and tenant farming were integral to agricultural production, supporting both state and private estates. Census records and papyri provide insight into the organization of households, labor obligations, and legal responsibilities, illustrating the detailed oversight maintained by Roman authorities. This structure allowed Rome to extract resources efficiently while managing a population of diverse ethnicities, languages, and cultural practices. The Roman period also saw significant infrastructure development. Canals, roads, and storage facilities were maintained or expanded to facilitate transport, trade, and military operations. Hydraulic works ensured irrigation and flood management, sustaining agricultural productivity. Monumental construction, including temples, public buildings, and fortifications, reflected both imperial investment and local elite patronage, blending Egyptian, Hellenistic, and Roman architectural traditions. These projects reinforced Roman authority while preserving continuity with Egypt's long-standing civic and religious traditions. Economic integration extended beyond agriculture. Trade networks connected Egyptian ports with the wider Mediterranean, facilitating the exchange of grain, textiles, papyrus, and luxury goods. Alexandria's harbors served as distribution centers, linking riverine and maritime commerce. Roman commercial law and fiscal oversight ensured that trade contributed to both provincial and imperial revenues, supporting administrative structures, military garrisons, and public works. The economy's efficiency relied on the coexistence of traditional Egyptian management practices and Roman bureaucratic supervision, demonstrating a pragmatic fusion of systems. Despite the overarching authority of Rome, Egyptian cultural and religious traditions persisted. Festivals, temple rituals, and local cults continued to thrive, often adapting to the presence of Roman officials. Inscriptions, temple reliefs, and papyri attest to ongoing devotion to deities such as Ammonius, Isis, and Serapis, the latter reflecting Hellenistic and Egyptian syncretism. Religious institutions served as intermediaries between the population and imperial authority, legitimizing Roman rule while preserving indigenous social and economic functions. This continuity provided stability and reinforced the perception of Egypt as a timeless, sacred landscape under imperial management. Roman Egypt thus represents a period of administrative sophistication, economic productivity, and cultural continuity. The province's integration into the empire relied on strict fiscal oversight, centralized governance, and military enforcement, while allowing traditional religious and civic institutions to operate within the imperial framework. Alexandria emerged as both an intellectual and economic capital, supporting trade, scholarship, and urban life. Agricultural management, infrastructure development, and bureaucratic organization ensured that Egypt fulfilled its role as the empire's granary and a source of prestige. By the late 3rd century CE, pressures from internal unrest, external threats, and broader imperial instability began to challenge Roman control. These developments set the stage for transformation in governance and religious identity. In the following centuries, the province would experience shifts in political authority, demographic patterns, and spiritual life, laying the groundwork for Egypt's emergence as a center of Christian thought and Byzantine administration. New faiths reshaped the spiritual landscape once ruled by Osiris and Ra. By the late 3rd century CE, Egypt's integration into the Roman Empire brought administrative, military, and religious changes that set the stage for the rise of Christianity. Diocletian's reforms, 284 to 305 CE, reorganized provincial governance, splitting Egypt into smaller administrative units to improve tax collection and reduce the power of local elites. The Praefectus Egypti retained overarching authority, but the division of the province into multiple augustal and subordinate districts allowed more direct oversight of agriculture, particularly the Nile Delta's grain production. Census records and papyri from this period reflect the meticulous fiscal administration, including land assessments, grain quotas, and labor obligations. While these measures enhanced imperial efficiency, they also increased pressure on local populations, contributing to social tension and creating a fertile environment for new religious movements promising spiritual and social alternatives. Christianity first took root in Egypt during the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, but it gained momentum under the relative instability of the late 3rd and early 4th centuries. Alexandria became a major center of Christian thought and scholarship, with leaders such as Origen and Clement of Alexandria establishing schools that combined Greek philosophical training with Christian doctrine. Archaeological evidence, including early Christian churches, inscriptions, and funerary chapels, indicates that Christian communities were increasingly established in both urban centers and rural villages. These communities operated within the broader Roman provincial framework, but maintained internal cohesion through local leadership, charitable institutions, and communal worship. The Diocletianic persecution, 303 to 311 CE, represents a critical moment in Egypt's Christian history. Temples across the Nile Valley suffered damage or destruction, and prominent Christian leaders were executed or exiled. Contemporary accounts, including those preserved in Coptic hagiographies, describe the systematic targeting of clergy, the confiscation of church property, and the forced participation in imperial cults. Despite the severity of these measures, Christian communities adapted by practicing clandestine worship and establishing networks of safe spaces, demonstrating resilience that would support the faith's eventual triumph under Constantine and the Edict of Milan in 313 CE. Under the Constantinian and subsequent Byzantine regimes, Christianity became the dominant religious framework in Egypt. Imperial policy encouraged conversion, promoted the construction of churches, and incorporated Christian officials into the administrative apparatus. Major cities such as Alexandria, Memphis, and Thebes saw the construction of basilicas and episcopal residences, while rural areas developed smaller worship centers and monastic settlements. The rise of monasticism, led by figures such as Anthony the Great and Pachomius, emphasized asceticism, communal living, and spiritual discipline. Monastic communities were often located in desert regions, where isolation facilitated contemplation and adherence to strict religious observance. Archaeological surveys of monasteries in the Nile Delta and Eastern Desert confirm the development of complex residential, worship, and agricultural infrastructure, illustrating the institutionalization of monastic life. The transition from traditional Egyptian religion to Christianity also affected temple structures and priestly authority. Temples once dedicated to Ammonius, Isis, Osiris, and Horus experienced progressive decline, as imperial and popular support shifted toward Christian institutions. Some temples were repurposed as churches, while others fell into disuse or ruin. Papyri and inscriptions record the transfer of property, taxation, and ritual functions from pagan to Christian authorities, reflecting both continuity in administrative procedures and transformation in religious practice. Despite this decline, many elements of traditional Egyptian belief persisted in folk practices, burial customs, and iconography, demonstrating a gradual and complex cultural transition rather than an abrupt replacement. Economically, Egypt remained a crucial province under Byzantine rule. Grain production continued to supply Constantinople and other imperial centers, and papyrus and textile industries persisted as sources of revenue and trade. The administrative structures established under Rome, refined by Diocletian, and maintained by the Byzantines allowed for effective management of resources, collection of taxes, and regulation of labor. At the same time, monastic communities contributed to local economies through agriculture, craft production, and charitable activities, integrating religious institutions into the province's economic framework. Political and military pressures continued to shape Egypt's role within the Byzantine Empire. The province was threatened by Persian incursions in the early 7th century, with campaigns led by the Sasanian Empire briefly occupying parts of the Nile Valley. Byzantine fortifications, garrison cities, and defensive canals were reinforced to resist these invasions, but internal challenges, including local unrest and fiscal strain, limited the effectiveness of imperial control. Contemporary chronicles, alongside archaeological evidence of fortifications and destruction layers, illustrate the strategic and economic significance of Egypt and the ongoing vulnerability of its urban and rural settlements. The Arab conquest of Egypt in 641 CE marked the final transformation of the province under Byzantine rule. Muslim forces captured Alexandria and established new administrative and religious structures, incorporating Egypt into the expanding Islamic world. The transition was facilitated by the relative exhaustion of Byzantine forces, the resilience of local communities accustomed to external rule, and the adaptability of administrative systems. While Christian institutions persisted, pagan traditions had largely disappeared from public life, and the Nile Valley entered a new phase of cultural and political organization. During this period, Egypt's spiritual, cultural, and economic landscape was thoroughly redefined. The shift from paganism to Christianity reshaped urban life, rural practices, and the built environment. Monasticism became a defining feature of Egyptian religious identity, preserving intellectual and spiritual traditions within an ascetic framework. Alexandria remained a hub of scholarship and religious authority, continuing the city's historic role as a center of Mediterranean thought. Despite political upheaval, Egypt's economy, infrastructure, and social structures demonstrated continuity and adaptation, ensuring the province's resilience under Byzantine administration and its eventual integration into the Islamic world. Though ancient traditions waned, their memory persisted beneath the sands, embedded in architectural remains, textual records, and cultural memory. The enduring legacy of pharaonic, Hellenistic, and Roman institutions provided a foundation upon which Christianity and later Islamic governance could build, creating a multi-layered historical continuum that preserved Egypt's identity even as its political and religious landscapes were transformed. After millennia of silence, Egypt spoke again through its inscriptions. The modern rediscovery of ancient Egypt began in earnest with Napoleon Bonaparte's expedition to Egypt in 1798. Accompanying the French military campaign was a team of scholars, engineers, and artists known as the Commission de Sciences et d'Arts, whose task was to document and study Egypt's monuments, inscriptions, and artifacts. Their work resulted in the monumental publication Description de l'Égypte, a detailed compendium of topography, architecture, and material culture that introduced European audiences to the scale and sophistication of ancient Egyptian civilization. These early explorations combined military logistics with systematic observation, establishing the precedent for field-based antiquarian research, even as interpretive frameworks remained limited by contemporary European intellectual paradigms. A turning point in the study of ancient Egypt came with the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799, during the French campaign near Rashid, Rosetta, in the Nile Delta. The stone, inscribed with a decree in hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Greek scripts, provided the essential key for deciphering Egyptian writing. Jean-François Champollion, through meticulous comparison and analysis, announced his successful decipherment of hieroglyphs in 1822. Champollion's work established a scientific method for reading and understanding Egyptian texts, moving beyond speculation to a foundation of linguistic and philological evidence. This breakthrough allowed scholars to interpret inscriptions from temples, tombs, and papyri with unprecedented accuracy, transforming Egypt from a landscape of mystery into a subject of rigorous academic study. Early excavations in the first half of the 19th century, conducted by both French and British scholars, laid the groundwork for systematic archaeology. Figures such as Giovanni Battista Belzoni and Henry Salt documented monumental sites including Thebes, Karnak, Luxor, and the Valley of the Kings, recovering statues, stelae, and coffins for European collections. While these early efforts often emphasized the collection of objects over contextual analysis, they provided essential material evidence for understanding pharaonic history. Detailed drawings, measurements, and notes preserved knowledge of sites that would later be altered or damaged by natural and human forces. These projects marked the transition from antiquarian curiosity to scholarly inquiry, emphasizing empirical observation and documentation. By the mid-19th century, archaeologists began to adopt more methodical approaches. Excavations at Saqqara, Giza, and Abydos prioritized stratigraphy, artifact provenance, and architectural context, recognizing that the spatial relationship of objects provided critical historical information. The distinction between monumental architecture, funerary artifacts, and everyday objects allowed scholars to reconstruct administrative, religious, and social practices of ancient Egypt with increasing precision. Papyrus archives uncovered during these excavations, including legal contracts, tax records, and literary texts, offered direct insight into the bureaucratic and cultural life of pharaonic society. Parallel to field archaeology, European museums and academic institutions played a critical role in disseminating knowledge. Collections in Paris, London, and Berlin facilitated comparative study, while publications and scholarly societies promoted debate, analysis, and interpretation. Scholars developed typologies for artifacts, hieroglyphic corpora, and chronologies for pharaonic dynasties, moving toward a standardized framework for understanding Egyptian history. The collaboration between fieldwork and institutional study helped establish Egyptology as a distinct scientific discipline, bridging observation, textual analysis, and historical reconstruction. Scientific approaches increasingly replaced the antiquarian focus on treasure hunting. Excavators and scholars began to emphasize contextual evidence, considering environmental conditions, settlement patterns, and architectural planning as integral to historical interpretation. Analyses of tomb inscriptions, temple reliefs, and papyrus documents provided insights into religious ideology, administrative structures, and social hierarchy. For example, study of the Abu Simbel temples and inscriptions from Deir el-Medina revealed patterns of labor organization, pharaonic propaganda, and economic logistics. These findings illustrated the interplay between material culture, textual evidence, and historical reconstruction, establishing methodological standards that continue in modern Egyptology. Technological innovations further enhanced research. The development of photographic documentation allowed detailed recording of hieroglyphic inscriptions, reliefs, and architectural features. Early mapping and surveying techniques provided accurate representations of monumental complexes, facilitating comparative studies and chronological analysis. Chemical and material studies of pigments, stone, and papyri introduced scientific rigor into conservation, authentication, and interpretation. These advances transformed the study of Egypt from anecdotal description into a systematic, evidence-based discipline capable of generating comprehensive historical narratives. The European rediscovery of Egypt also shaped broader cultural and intellectual contexts. Public fascination with ancient monuments, fueled by exhibitions, publications, and lectures, influenced art, architecture, and literature across Europe. Egyptomania inspired neoclassical design, museum curation, and academic curricula, embedding ancient Egypt within the Western imagination. This popular engagement provided both funding and intellectual momentum for continued exploration and scholarship, even as it occasionally encouraged sensationalized interpretations detached from historical accuracy. By the late 19th century, the foundation of modern Egyptology was firmly established. Excavations had revealed royal tombs, temples, fortresses, and settlements, while hieroglyphic literacy allowed scholars to reconstruct dynastic chronologies, religious practices, and administrative systems. European institutions, in collaboration with local authorities, codified excavation practices, artifact preservation, and publication standards. The transition from antiquarian curiosity to scientific archaeology transformed Egypt from a landscape of mystery into a field of rigorous inquiry, demonstrating how systematic research could recover millennia of historical knowledge from monuments, texts, and material culture. Modern Egyptology thus bridged the temporal gap between the pharaonic past and contemporary scholarship. The combination of archaeological excavation, textual decipherment, and analytical methodology enabled a comprehensive understanding of ancient Egyptian civilization, from political institutions to religious ideology and daily life. These early efforts laid the groundwork for subsequent generations of researchers, ensuring that Egypt's monumental and textual heritage could be interpreted with clarity, precision, and academic rigor. Modern Egyptology would transform these ruins into data, creating a framework for reconstructing the complex history of Egypt from prehistory through the Ptolemaic, Roman, and Byzantine periods, and providing the tools to understand how this civilization shaped human culture for over 3 millennia. Every generation rediscovers Egypt, not as myth, but as the foundation of human civilization. From the late 19th century onward, archaeology in Egypt shifted from antiquarian exploration to systematic, scientific investigation. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869, coupled with European colonial interests, increased access to previously remote sites. Scholars such as Flinders Petrie pioneered methods emphasizing careful excavation, stratigraphy, and contextual analysis. Petrie introduced the practice of recording artifact provenance and employing ceramic typologies to establish relative chronologies, allowing for a more precise reconstruction of Egypt's long historical timeline. This methodological rigor transformed Egyptology into a modern discipline, moving beyond treasure hunting toward the disciplined recovery and interpretation of material culture. Stratigraphic excavation became central to understanding the layered history of sites like Saqqara, Abydos, and Amarna. By analyzing soil layers, architectural phases, and burial contexts, archaeologists were able to trace the evolution of cities, temples, and settlements over millennia. Radiocarbon dating, dendrochronology, and other scientific techniques refined chronological frameworks, enabling scholars to situate discoveries within absolute timelines. Papyrological studies, including legal documents, literary texts, and administrative records, provided complementary data, revealing the intricacies of governance, economy, and daily life across dynasties. The integration of stratigraphy, material analysis, and textual evidence allowed for a holistic reconstruction of pharaonic, Ptolemaic, Roman, and Byzantine Egypt. Museum curation and ethics became increasingly significant during this period. European and North American institutions, including the British Museum, Louvre, and Metropolitan Museum of Art, amassed vast collections of Egyptian artifacts, often removed during colonial expeditions. The acquisition, display, and interpretation of these objects prompted debates over provenance, cultural heritage, and repatriation. In response, modern Egyptology has emphasized collaboration with Egyptian authorities, local archaeologists, and international organizations to ensure responsible excavation, preservation, and exhibition. Legal frameworks, including UNESCO conventions, now guide the treatment of antiquities, balancing scholarly research with the protection of cultural patrimony. Systematic research also explored the interplay between material culture, architecture, and social organization. Detailed studies of temple complexes, royal tombs, and urban settlements revealed the integration of religious, political, and economic systems. Excavations at Luxor, Karnak, and Deir el-Medina highlighted the role of labor organization, craft specialization, and administrative oversight in sustaining monumental construction. Analysis of inscriptions, reliefs, and papyri provided insight into bureaucratic procedures, taxation, and the coordination of agricultural production, demonstrating the complex mechanisms that underpinned Egyptian society. Such research confirmed that Egypt's enduring achievements rested on an intricate combination of geography, governance, economy, and ideology. The modern period also witnessed a growing emphasis on Egyptian national identity. Following independence from colonial rule in 1922, Egyptian archaeologists and scholars asserted greater control over excavation, conservation, and interpretation. Institutions such as the Supreme Council of Antiquities and National Museums promoted awareness of Egypt's heritage as a source of cultural pride and historical continuity. Excavations led by Egyptian teams emphasized local expertise, fostering scholarship that integrated global methodologies with indigenous perspectives. Public education, media, and tourism have further reinforced the role of ancient Egypt as a central component of modern Egyptian identity. Egypt's influence extends beyond archaeology into global culture, art, and imagination. Egyptian motifs appear in architecture, painting, jewelry, and literature worldwide, from neoclassical design to Art Deco. The fascination with pharaonic imagery and symbolism inspired movements in European and American art, fueled popular media, and shaped perceptions of ancient civilization. Egypt's contributions to mathematics, medicine, engineering, and writing have been recognized as foundational to subsequent human knowledge, establishing the civilization as a reference point for both scholarly inquiry and cultural imagination. Religious and intellectual influences persist as well. Concepts derived from Egyptian cosmology, ritual practice, and symbolic thought informed Hellenistic philosophy, early Christian theology, and later esoteric traditions. Monasticism, codified administrative systems, and architectural innovations originated or were refined in Egypt, leaving an enduring legacy visible in Mediterranean and Near Eastern societies. By tracing these threads, scholars highlight the continuity of ideas and practices, demonstrating that Egypt's historical contributions extend far beyond its political boundaries and temporal duration. Contemporary archaeology increasingly integrates technology to expand knowledge while preserving sites. Remote sensing, satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and digital mapping enable the non-invasive study of urban and necropolis complexes. 3D modeling and virtual reconstruction facilitate the visualization of architectural phases, allowing both scholars and the public to explore ancient spaces with unprecedented clarity. These tools complement traditional excavation and textual analysis, creating a multi-layered understanding of Egypt's history that bridges past and present. The global public continues to engage with Egypt's legacy through museums, documentaries, exhibitions, and popular media. Institutions such as the Egyptian Museum in Cairo and traveling international exhibitions present artifacts and narratives that contextualize ancient achievements within their historical frameworks. Educational initiatives and public archaeology programs foster awareness of conservation, ethics, and historical interpretation, emphasizing that Egypt's heritage is both a scholarly resource and a shared cultural treasure. Modern Egyptology also addresses the dynamic interplay between history, politics, and identity. Excavation practices, heritage management, and academic discourse reflect not only the ancient past but also contemporary social and national priorities. Debates over repatriation, cultural property, and the representation of Egypt in global media underscore the ongoing relevance of Egypt's material and intellectual legacy. Scholars must navigate the balance between research, preservation, and public engagement, ensuring that the study of ancient Egypt remains both scientifically rigorous and culturally responsible. Through systematic research, contextual analysis, and technological innovation, modern scholars have reconstructed Egypt's complex historical narrative from prehistory through the Byzantine period. The integration of archaeology, papyrology, architecture, and art history enables comprehensive reconstructions of political institutions, religious systems, economic structures, and daily life. These efforts underscore the sophistication of Egyptian civilization and its enduring relevance as a foundation for comparative study and historical understanding. Thus, the study of Egypt continues, bridging ancient order with modern inquiry. Each excavation, publication, and discovery contributes to a cumulative understanding of a civilization that shaped human history for over 3 millennia. Modern research illuminates Egypt not as legend or myth, but as a chronologically precise, culturally complex, and institutionally sophisticated society whose legacy informs both scholarship and the broader imagination of humanity. Explore the legacy of Egypt not just through monuments and artifacts, but through the stories they preserve. Visit museums, read primary sources and scholarly research, and support efforts to protect and study this extraordinary civilization. Every generation has the opportunity to uncover new insights and keep the history of Egypt alive, a bridge between the past and our understanding of human achievement.